One connected to another.
Oh, is that right? So it's not, oh, just,
Yeah.
it gets stuck.
It got stuck.
All right. Yep. All right. It is 6:03 on June 18th. This is a regular meeting of the Common Council, City of Oneonta, called to order, and if the clerk will call the roll.
Mayor Drennan.
Here.
Councilmember Mosher Campoli.
Here.
Councilmember Walsh Russo.
Here.
Councilmember McHugh.
Here.
Councilmember Lepari Shu. Councilmember Carson.
Here.
Councilmember Harrington.
Here.
Councilmember Wooden. Councilmember Matheson.
Here. Will you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, folks. And we have petitioners, public hearings, and correspondence, of which we will take our public hearing first. We have a public hearing before the Common Council to receive public comments on the City of Oneonta's potential submission of the Community Development Block Grant CDBG application for the CDBG Business Expansion and Startup Program for up to $100,000 for Social Eats Project 607 on Main Street in the City of Oneonta that will result in the creation of up to 4 full-time equivalent jobs. And before we begin the public hearing, I'd like to give the folks from Social Eats an opportunity, specifically, I think, Michelle, an opportunity. Would you like to tell us a little bit about the project?
Sure. We're looking to expand this business, as we're seeing a lot of success with the business, and we're getting a lot of inquiries for caterings and private events. So we want to be able to support that demand and apply to get support to get other things for that expansion.
Yeah, so as we're moving forward through the pre-app phase, this program is very worthwhile because, look, it involves investing right here in our local community, and then you get the support certainly from the city, which helps with sponsoring it. But this is something that the state actually wants people to participate in, because if you can provide jobs in our small community, then you're doing a decent thing. So we believe when we come in with this, that that's probably even a conservative amount, but we want to make sure that we're able to meet the requirements of a grant of this nature, and so we know that we'll be able to create 4 FTEs at least from this project.
Okay. Anything more you want to add?
No.
Okay.
No, thank you.
I'd like to give the council an opportunity to talk. Is Judy in the room? There you are. I'd like to give the council an opportunity to ask whatever questions they have of Judy, our Community Development Director, and then once we've finished that, then we will open the public hearing to the petitioner. So,
Mark, do you want me to give a little overview?
yes, if you don't mind, please. Please.
Okay, so what the application is for is the Community Development Block Grant Program. They just recently changed the name. It's called the Business Expansion and Startup BEST Program. And businesses of all sizes can apply for this. If you have 25 or fewer employees when you apply, then you are eligible for between $25,000 to $100,000 in grant funding. And you have to create a full-time equivalent position for every $25,000 in grant money. A full-time equivalent position means a 40-hour-a-week job. That could be a couple of part-time people, as long as the part-time work totals 40 hours a week. We're looking for permanent year-round positions. They also, the grant program is federally funded through the state, and because it's federally funded originally, it has to meet a national objective. So those jobs have to be offered to full-time or to low to moderate income persons. And what that means is that they can't require prior experience or anything more than a high school education, so that it makes it fair for low to moderate income people to be able to get the job and get on the job training. So it's a really, it's a win-win for the INL's students and also for the city. And it's also for that area of the city, because having investment in that East End area is really awesome. Because a lot of times we hear the focus is on downtown, but we're trying to really focus throughout the city. The typical program requires that the grant funds can only be up to 40% of the project cost. But in certain cases, if they have more of a match in terms of cash equity, then they can apply for up to 50%. So in this case, they did meet that requirement for that extra match. So their total project is going to be in the low 200,000 total. And they'll be coming up with that match themselves. So this is quite an investment for social needs, as well as, in addition to the grant funding. The money can be used for, it could purchase property, but they're not using it for that. They're going to be using it for mainly equipment, but it could also be used for working capital, payroll, inventory, employee training expenses, and other items. It's a very nice program. The first step is the pre-application, which will be submitted shortly. And then that goes into the state funding agency, and they will review it. If they like what they see, they'll invite the city to submit the application itself. And then we put that in advance of a monthly meeting that the state agency has, and then the decision to fund it is made at that meeting. Typically, when they invite you in, you have a really, really strong chance of getting funded. So we're very optimistic about that. We've already talked to the state about that, about this project, and they're excited to see it come in. So that's my quick overview.
I appreciate that, Judy. Let me open this up for questions from council. If any council members have a question of Judy that you'd like further explanation of what this is? Have we? No?
Oh, I have a
Yes.
question.
No, go ahead, Katie.
Just about the process, I know we're having a public hearing right now, then is that all that you need in order to submit the application?
No, what will happen is, typically the public hearing is required before the application itself goes in.
Okay,
But in an effort to improve transparency, to ensure transparency, so the public knows what we're doing, we're actually having a public hearing before we submit the pre-application. Once we get invited in for an application, we'll be back to council for an authorizing resolution to submit the application. We don't need that yet, until we get invited in.
okay, follow-up question? Is there any local match requirement or just admin?
The match will be by the business owners
Okay,
that are getting the grant. And these grants are available from the state on an open round, on an as-needed basis. And basically, any business or potential business can talk to us, and if they are eligible, they could apply. If they have a strong, it has to be a strong project. They have to have the financials in place to show that they can come up with their match, and that, that they can do the project. But in any case, for this particular program, the city applies on behalf of one grantee.
okay.
It's not a multiple grantees like Broadway's program is.
Anything further?
No, thank you.
Cecilia?
Actually, Judy answered my question about the availability in terms of if it's an annual.
There is a limit to how much CDBG money we can have in any given year. I have to check on that. It used to be $750 for economic development. I don't know if that's gone up. We typically don't have that many in a year, and if we did, we would just wait till the following year if the grantee can wait.
Any further questions? Yes.
I just want to add, I'm excited to see a program like this being used, and especially in the East End and in Portland.
Yes, Gwen.
So did we have any other applicants?
We go by as businesses contact us and reach out to us for assistance, and we had two other potential businesses reach out to us and talk to us. They have not come back in to formalize submitting an application, but they're welcome to at any time.
And do these applicants have to secure their funds in a private account for the state? during this process?
They have to show that they are able to come up with a match, and then the way that the match works is they'll actually spend the total project cost, and we'll be submitting for reimbursement throughout the project for that. But they don't have to actually come up with cash for us, they have to come up with the money to spend on what they're purchasing. And they have to show us the invoices and cancel checks or credit card receipts to show that full project cost before they'll get the final reimbursement.
So they're funding the entire project up front and then being reimbursed?
They're funding part of it up front, and then we get a reimbursement for them, and then they'll fund another part, and we'll get another reimbursement for them. We do it as they go.
And as a small business owner, how do they find out more about these programs?
We, through this type of thing, like the micro enterprise program, we put ads in the newspaper, we actually have a funding round for that. This one, we tried to get the information out to the businesses, but there's so much going on, we could do better at marketing it. But when a business contacts the city to ask what the city can do for them, it's one of the first things that we provide, the information on the micro, the information on this, and any other program that might fit their project. Yeah, we can do a better job on marketing for sure. It's just a matter of, time.
Yeah, I mean, not tonight, but you mentioned a couple of years ago, you were gonna start making like short videos and we were gonna put them on the
Well, yeah, we
website.
wanted to do that for the development projects and the tax credits, and we just have not had a chance to do that with Louise.
Further questions, further comments? If not, then I'll open the floor to petitioners. If there is anyone who would like to speak on this subject, the context being the public hearing, just raise your hand and we'll let you speak. And it
I
seems
just
like,
wanted
yes.
to make a
Michelle.
comment. I learned about the grant through a small business seminar training that I did with Michelle Caton.
Mhm.
And it was a very valuable resource, and Judy came to that to speak on behalf of the city as well, so,
Through the Small Business Development Center.
great.
Yeah, they do good work. All right, with seeing no further conversation on this, we'll close that public hearing. And we'll move on to our petitioners. And if there's anyone who would like to speak, please, let us know who you are and where you live. And you got yourself 3 minutes, and you can either stand at the podium or where you are seated, you can just stand. Is there anybody who'd like to speak? All right. Well, that's a nice change of hat. I spoke too soon.
I just basically have a question. My name is David Ranieri. I own the property at 5 Columbia Street. I just would like to know the status of 7 Columbia Street, the house that caught fire, and just very concerned about the building. So I just don't know if Steve could answer that question, or someone at the panel, if something's gonna happen to that home.
That's where it is.
Say it again, please.
They've contracted with someone who's gonna demolish it.
Okay. So that's,
Do you know when, Steve? Soon, months?
Well, I mean, so they've hired like Servpro, and that's what's gonna happen, is they're gonna demo it.
okay. All right, so seeing no further interest in the petitioners section, we will close that and we will move on to correspondence. Do we have any correspondence? We do not. We have presentations, and we have a presentation on the Route 23 and 28 Complete Streets project, Fisher Associates, and you have the floor. Do we have them here? There you are.
Drag us over a second. Walk the street. I promise I'll move back.
It's all good. Leave where it is.
Okay. Thank you everyone for giving me the floor here to just give the city and the residents an update on this project. Greg, Chris, Judy, and I have been working together for not quite a year. I think we had our kickoff meeting last July. I know the city has been moving through the seeker process, and from corresponding with Greg, we thought it would be a good checkpoint, bring the council up to date or up to speed, bring the public up to speed, and just kind of give an overview on where we are, what the next steps are, and what you can expect, moving forward. So just quick agenda, just background history, on the project. We'll go over what the project limits are, This is a unique one, not to jump ahead, but the city is the lead, if you will, but the town has a good chunk of work that's occurring as part of this project. So it's good intermunicipal coordination to kind of have a broader, expand the network and make sure everything's connected, you know, as we're looking at, you know, pedestrian and bicycle facilities. So it's a really good example of that. It's not something you see. I do this over the state. You typically don't see a lot of intermunicipal coordination at this scale, so it's great. We'll talk about the objectives, what work's occurred to date, the alternatives that we're looking at. We're going to talk about the New York State DOT projects briefly, just acknowledging them. I know that the state has been in front of the city and the public regarding the roundabout project. There's another project that's occurring in the town, and they all kind of intertwines with our project. So we'll just talk about that. Then we'll get to funding and costs. We'll talk about schedule, and then just what the next steps are. So from a project history standpoint, in 2021, the city coordinated with the town and put together a transportation alternatives funding application through New York State DOT. And that was a federal funding opportunity that is statewide, and it also kind of boils down to the individual regions where the applications are occurring. Really, the fundamental need was that we needed it if there was a need for pedestrian and bicycle facilities on Lettuce Highway and on Route 23 and 28 within the town, and making sure that it was a connected, you know, corridor. Lettuce Highway, very heavy truck and vehicle traffic. Same thing on 23 and 28. Relatively high speeds. You know, it's not a very pedestrian-friendly environment at Lettuce Highway. You know, it wasn't really designed for that back in, you know, the 60s when it was designed and constructed. But with all the various developments that have occurred on the town side, but then also the needs on the city side, there's a lot more pedestrian and bicycle traffic going in between, you know, the two sides right now. So there was really a need for it. So just overall project limits, and it's a little hard to see that. So up here, you have Maple Street where the roundabout project is. So that's the north end of Lettuce Highway. You have the Susquehanna River going through the middle, right along I-88. So our project limits are shown in orange. You know, so basically we're going to mesh in with the roundabout project, carry it down to this the intersection here of 23 and 28. We'll talk about it a little bit more, but there is a DOT project that's going to be constructing sidewalks kind of right in the middle here. It's going to be also making some improvements to the traffic signals that are there, just to improve both pedestrian and vehicular safety. They're going to be adding a turn lane, I believe. And then bookending it on either side of 23 and 28 is there's going to be sidewalk extensions. You know, so out in front of Home Depot, and then down past Walmart, and ultimately connecting to the Lantern Hill, you know, community there. So existing conditions, just over 15,000 vehicles per day north of I-88. You know, so thinking about that as kind of a break point, if you will, on the Lettuce Highway. And then the south, you're approaching 18,000 vehicles per day. Traffic speeds on the Lettuce Highway, 55 miles an hour. It does drop to 30 as you get further north. And then on 23 and 28, it's generally 45 miles an hour. You know, so it's not really a great place for pedestrians to be walking along the shoulders when you like those speeds. Crash rates, the two traffic signals at the end of the I-88 ramps, they're roughly 2.5 times the statewide average for a similar intersection. So in the middle, you have some vehicular safety issues, you know, that also need to be you know, kind of considered and looked at. So we've talked about the pedestrian infrastructure a lot. You know, just two typical photos, and I think anybody who's driven this is very well aware of what it looks like out there. You know, so at the Lettuce Highway, or along Lettuce Highway, there is sidewalks and some crosswalks right at the interchange, but beyond that, there's nothing dedicated for pedestrians. Same thing on 23 and 28. It's really disjointed. There's a few stretches of sidewalks and crosswalks, but it's not a continuous network. And really what that does is it limits that connectivity between the city, Newa Park, downtown. There's a lot of all the hotels over on the town side. You know, all my field visits out here, especially during the summer, let alone when there's, you know, an event up in Cooperstown or something. You see a lot of people who are staying in a hotel downtown. They're just walking along Lettuce Highway, trying to get into the park or trying to get to the downtown businesses. So that connectivity is not there. You know, so it's really a lot of what we're trying to help here. So project objectives. You know, so these are key. These are things that we look at from an engineering perspective. How are we going to identify what the alternatives are, what ultimately we're going to do, because these are the problems that we're trying to solve. So we want to improve pedestrian and cyclist safety with effective infrastructure. We want to create connected corridors, that sustain economic growth. And we want to encourage that multimodal transportation use. That's walking, cycling, and and the use of transit. So where we are right now is we've gone through, we did an existing condition survey, we collected existing traffic data, and then we've kind of started to go through the engineering process. And the initial alternative and proposed project that was put forward in the grant application, we're calling alternative 1, that was, and I'll get into the graphics here a little bit more, that was a shared use path along the west side of Lettuce Highway. So it was going to reduce the southbound side of Lettuce Highway, so picture it between Maple Street and the interchange. It was going to reduce it from 2 lanes southbound to 1 lane southbound. And that existing lane and shoulder that's there now is where the shared use path is going to go. That path is going to continue down to the 23 and 28 intersection, and then infill of sidewalks along 23 and 28 on the town side. As we started looking into it, and as we started to work with Greg, work with Chris, work with Judy, there became, well, wait a minute, maybe we step back here. There's not as much traffic on Lettuce Highway as what was originally envisioned. Would it work to basically take all of the traffic that we have now and put it on the current northbound lanes? So right now there's that paved median with a guide rail that separates the 2 directions of traffic, if you will. All the traffic would get moved over to that existing northbound lanes. The present southbound side of the highway would become effectively a greenway, really almost a blank canvas, if you will, that could be integrated with the park, provides opportunities for more recreation, just a different setting and a really great entryway into the city. Not so much a utilitarian highway design, where that's the predominant feature. We would really, announce that this is part of the park, and it'd be really a way to really make some great use of that existing land. So those are the 2 alternatives that we started to look at, and we are currently, evaluating. So just from an overview standpoint, I talked about the 2 alternatives. That's only north of I-88. So south of it, both alternatives are the same. The sidewalk network within the town is exactly the same. There's no difference between the alternatives. So the only difference in alternatives, as we discussed them, is north of I-88. So south of the I-80 interchange, we're going to have a shared use path again on the west side. So it's going to come across the Susquehanna Bridge. So that's going to go from I-88 all the way down to that 23 and 28 intersection. There's going to be connections into Niwa Park. For those of you who've been out there right now, there's a little bit of a goat path that goes from, I guess it would be the westbound entrance ramp into the park over near the dog park. We would formalize that and make that kind of a stone dust or paved path. We're also looking at connections down to the baseball field and then also down to Fair Street, just to be able to connect those communities and those neighborhoods with Niwa Park, but also get them access to whatever infrastructure is built for pedestrians and bicycles along Lettuce Highway. Give them that access so that they don't have to walk all the way up to Maple Street and then back down. The other item that we're looking at is you can picture the existing, we call them slip ramps. That's that right turn lane at the I-80 interchange. Those can present real challenges for pedestrians and bicycles because the vehicles don't stop. Part of what we're evaluating and proposing is that those are eliminated and it becomes a typical right turn lane like you might see at a downtown intersection. So all the traffic gets brought up to the traffic signal, all the traffic stops, the pedestrians and bicycles have their own signal as they're crossing. So that's proposed at both the westbound exit ramp and the both westbound exit ramps. Or eastbound exit ramp and westbound exit ramp, sorry. Part of what we're also doing is we're looking at optimizing the traffic signals at the intersection, at the interchange. So part of what we started to look at as we looked at those slip ramp removals and some of the lane reconfigurations underneath the bridge, was that there were some opportunities to improve the timing and change kind of how the phasing and the time gets allocated for the traffic signals and as the vehicles move through that. We're also going to have landscaping that we're going to be looking to add and lighting, if the budget allows. So the sidewalks along 23, so this is in the town portion. So generally, it's from Main Street all the way to Lantern Village, and then also an extension down Courtyard Drive. So to give you a visual alternative one, I do have a plan view that kind of gives you a little bit more zoomed out view. But, so this is looking north right now. So these are the existing northbound lanes. So 1 lane or 2 lanes north, just as you do now. Southbound though, there's that multi-use path that I discussed. There'd be a planted median, but where stormwater could get collected, and there would be a single lane going south. Basically between Maple Street and I-88. And then that's a sectional view that just shows, again, 2 lanes north of the shoulder, and then a single lane south. The other item that we're also looking at, if the budget allows, is actually modifying the existing median that's out there. So right now it's asphalt, galvanized guide rail. What we're looking at is basically replanting that, making that a grassed landscaped area. Again, just to help that gateway and make it less of a transportation corridor and more of a gateway into the city. So this is an overall plan view. So this right here, ID8, you have Niwa Park there. Up to the right there is where the roundabout project meets in. So really, this is the limit of what we're looking at for alternative 1. It's for that sidewalk or for that shared use path on the west side of Lettuce Highway. And you can see, so this is the connection from the interchange into the back by the dog park. This is the connection that I was discussing kind of midway through the highway. It touches down by the ball field here. And then this is the connection over by Fair Street. So this is a trap. So part of what we have to do is, because we're removing a lane on the southbound Lettuce Highway and making those changes at the interchange, we needed to run a traffic model. So we took the existing traffic data, plugged it into the software that we use, and we did an analysis. And this is swing plays. This is a video of just how that would operate. Because one of the things that I left out here is, while we're removing a lane southbound on Lettuce Highway, when we get back to this interchange, there's still, we bring it back to 2 lanes. So it's because there's such a heavy right turn lane to go west on I-88, you need that additional turning space. If everyone was in a single lane still, traffic would back up further. So. This is going to be really hard to see based on these TVs. But I can work with Greg and we can post, we can post these on the city's website, just for people to be able to see them.
Yeah, we can see it.
So the way the signals are set up is that, obviously the interchange goes, the interstate traffic will have to go to stop Lettuce Highway north-south, but then the Lettuce Highway goes. Okay, so this is alternative 2. Again, this is the same, very similar graphic to what we provide for alternative 1. But as you can see, really we have 2-way traffic now. So instead of traffic only going out of the screen or into the screen northbound, there'll be 2-way traffic on the present northbound side of Lettuce Highway. And this entire southbound side becomes a little bit of a blank canvas. As we're looking at it, you could have a separate pedestrian path separated from the bicycle path, so that if somebody wanted to cruise through, they're not dodging pedestrians or people on strollers, but same thing. Someone can have a little bit more of a meandering, pedestrian path to get through. There could be public art, there's a lot of different options. Really the idea is that we take a building blocks approach, set the canvas, and then that allows the city, as part of future projects, future initiatives, to really build it out and really make it a great gateway into the city. This is a plan view of it, so again, two-way traffic on this side. This is entirely closed now. That becomes really just a greenway, as we're calling it. And then this is a plan view. So one thing to note is that it's not the greenway, basically, it's not the greenway for the entire stretch, because again, we do need to cross traffic, over to get to I-88. We need to return to that configuration, if you will, when you get to the interstate. And same thing up at the roundabout. We're going to cross traffic back over to the existing, traffic patterns as they see. But same amenities, if you will, as alternative one. We're going to have the connections into the park, both at the interchange, at the ball field, and then Fair Street. And then we're also again looking at, having that greening up that the existing paved median that's there. The big message to take away from these traffic videos is that it works. That it does not increase delay at the interchange by making these changes, and that's as much as what we had to do for proof of concept. Okay, so moving on to south of the interchange, so this is I-88 coming through. You have the river, and this is Route 23 and 28. So again, we're going to carry that path down through the interchange, staying on the west side. It's going to come across the bridge, and it's going to intersect, because this is where the DOT project, this is where they're adding sidewalks and crosswalks to the intersection. We are proposing a little connection into the New Island Trail area here. There's an existing single track trail that goes down. This existing crosswalk will extend, let's say, 100 feet of sidewalk to get down to that, just to get good access to that. So I talked about the New York State DOT projects. There's two of them. There's the Maple Street roundabout. So that's continued coordination between projects. I think we've had at least 2 or 3 full team meetings with both, our engineering team and the state's engineering team. Talk about design features, talk about how they mesh together, schedule. Our project, the message here is that our project will integrate with whatever they're building, and vice versa. We're going to complement each other. They're going to work. We're not going to get to 2 years from now and the alignment's not going to work. Everything's going to be, we're going to adjust as we need to make sure that they both work. The construction schedule on that, it may mirror what we end up doing. And I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but we anticipate going to construction next spring, that being a 1-year, project. They may be on the same path and same schedule as that. And so that may, I'll say, force some discussions as far as, well, do we make this one big project, instead of having 2 separate projects, 2 separate contractors, do we make it one big project and get it all done at the same time, same contractor, same inspection staff, same administration? But that's a conversation that, it came up a couple months ago with the state, and we all agreed, well, let's track it, let's touch base later this year, see where we are, make sure we're still on the same schedule. Let's see, so the Southside Safety Project. So this is a project that's entirely within the town, and it really falls right in the middle of the proposed project, and really the proposed grant application. So one of the things that you're going to see here is that the town portion is actually less than what they had originally anticipated, and that's because the state is taking care of those sidewalks that they had accounted for as part of the state project. Again, same thing, continued coordination. It's actually one big meeting because we all kind of know we're on the same schedule. I believe that their schedule's a little bit behind ours, so I don't think it's gonna be on the same schedule for construction, but that's subject to change, obviously. They're adding the sidewalks between Hannaford and the Southside Mall. They're gonna add the pedestrian crossings across 23 and 28 to connect. And they're gonna be replacing various traffic signals that are through there. And I believe the last I saw is that there's a public workshop for the state project, I believe it's in July of this year. So alternatives, in terms of the next steps. So where we are is we prepared what's referred to as the draft design approval document. That it's really the preliminary engineering. It's making sure that you're building the right project. So it doesn't have the nitty-gritty detailed engineering all worked out yet, but it really makes sure that you've looked at all the environmental issues, if there are any, made sure that you're within the costs, really make sure it works. Like you're not moving forward with something that's not gonna be, buildable and it's not gonna work. That's currently under review by DOT. We're awaiting comments. We submitted alternative 2 as the preferred alternative, as the one that we wanted to move forward with, to detailed design. So the next step is gonna be, okay, what are DOT's comments? Do they change any of our direction here? Do they change our alternative? Is it gonna add costs or anything else like that? Or is there a reason that they don't, like one of the alternatives? This being a state highway, the state has ultimate authority and they have the final approval, if you will, on what happens here. So if the state is not a fan of alternative 2, alternative 1 may be the direction that we have to go. And that's all gonna get kind of hashed out here really in the next month and a half, I'd say. We should be receiving their comments, I think by the end of this month, fingers crossed. But, and I think we'll have a really good idea as to where they stand, formally once we get those comments. So the project funding versus estimated costs. Greg, feel free to interject here at any time. So the total funding was $8.1 million. That was split up again between the city and the town. There's matched funding in here. So there's some of it's 80% federal dollars, 20% local. So that local share is what would get split up by the town. So this was a total, for alternative 1. Alternative 1 is less than alternative 2. It's just less work. It's less work on the grand scheme of things. The local cost for alternative 1 will be the $2.6 million or so. The message here is that the alternative 2, the actual construction cost estimates are beyond the funding. And Greg and I were talking, earlier. There's ideas of either adjusting the scope, to make it work, or seeking additional funding, via other state grants. Greg, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I think just following up from this meeting, we'll probably talk more about this project and get a little bit more in the details as to what the options might be for the city's funding sources, probably at the Finance HR Committee that's coming up next week, and we'll bring that back to council. But as Steve alluded to, there's options where we could include some kind of add alternates in the bid specs and construction documents to put together, maybe to give us a decision point. Do we include the additional lighting or not, or maybe there's less median work that's done. Or we've been looking at potential other grant opportunities that would supplement the TAP grant we have from DOT that would reduce the local share for the city. And then, as Steve said before, there's no difference in town costs from alternative 1 to alternative 2 as far as their scope goes.
So from a schedule standpoint, so we're having this meeting. We anticipate having another, public meeting, really with the citywide, I'll say, a little bit more of a workshop format where the posters will be on a table, people can come in, ask questions. We are presenting at the town board on July 10th. So they'll be getting a very similar presentation actually. So that's where the public involvement will be in this summer. Once we get to that design approval step that I referenced, then we'll start the detailed engineering. So we anticipate that being later this summer through the fall. And then we're hoping to advertise for construction really either late December or early January to make sure that we get out in front of some of the other projects that are out there, get a good contractor, get them while they're hungry for, we'll give give us a better bid price. Construction starting, after thaw in the spring, and then wrapping up, in the fall. With that, any questions?
Council, questions? Don?
So you said that there's, during the presentation, you said both that there was heavy traffic and not a lot of traffic. Which is it?
It's heavier traffic. It was built, just like a lot of interstates and things like that, back in the 60s with an assumption for, a lot of traffic and that there was gonna be huge growth. It was not, it has been met. This happens all over the state, honestly, happens all over the country, where projections aren't met. But we do have heavy vehicle traffic, and the traffic that is there, because there's not a lot of congestion, so it's heavier than you would want with, someone walking along the shoulder.
Well, the reason I ask is because right now, traffic moves pretty well in 4 lanes. If it's not 4 lanes, you're gonna have the same amount of traffic, but potentially over time even more, but there'll be fewer lanes.
And so our traffic projections, as we look at it, so we collect existing traffic numbers, we project out 20 or 30 years.
But if it's working well with 4 lanes, how can it work well with 1 or 3, with 2 or 3?
Well, what we're saying is there's actually excess capacity. So that extra lane is not required for it to work well, is what we're saying.
You also said that there would be a lot of walkers from the hotels to the park and downtown. How many?
We have not done pedestrian counts, but I've been out there multiple times and seen tourists walking back and forth.
I've also collected a few numbers. So on, now you realize that we had weather extremes here. So I tried to pick a day where it was in the middle. So on Saturday, May 4th, from 11:30 to 12, I counted vehicles and pedestrians and bicyclists. So there was 867 cars and trucks going both ways. There were 3 walkers and 2 bikes. So that's less than 1% of the people who were moving back and forth. Probably a lot less because in the vehicles there could be more than 1 person. So, on a day that was ideal, it was 66 degrees and partly cloudy. And there weren't a lot of walkers.
I guess I'm not sure what,
Well, I don't see a lot of walkers. So for example, today is an example where it's, 90-something degrees or upper 80s. So a lot of people aren't going to be walking from downtown Oneonta to the south side or the other way. And in February, there's not going to be a lot of people. It's a lot of money to reduce the number of vehicles, the number of traffic lanes for vehicles, and there'll be very few walkers and bikers. I also thought about, I live on Deed Street, and if I were to walk to, and I usually shop at Hannaford, I mentioned Hannaford a couple of times. If I were to walk from where I live, to Hannaford to buy groceries, I actually went there on Friday, and when I came back, I weighed the bags. The heaviest one was 11 pounds, and the lightest one was 6 pounds. So it'd be a combination of 17 pounds to walk from Maine and Deeds to Hannaford, from Hannaford to Maine and Deeds. I don't see too many people carrying that much weight. I just don't see attracting a lot of walkers.
Don, I'm gonna let some other folks jump in.
Well, that was the end.
I'm gonna just agree to disagree, because even just this morning, there was a family pushing a stroller with 4 children in tow, when I went over to Southside. And there were at least 3 people in McDonald's uniforms walking to McDonald's. And then when I went and got my Dunkin' right before I came, there was people leaving work and people walking from Hannaford towards the highway. So just in those 2 instances today, I saw more people than you were able to catch out there in that moment. But it's a time period, right? You're only out there for a certain amount of hours. hours, but, you know, I can personally attest that there's more people biking and walking out there.
Elaine?
Yeah, I was just gonna add something similar, that I don't think it's about the total number of pedestrians, it's the overall safety, you know, because they're the most vulnerable. And I understand that this project is also aimed at improving pedestrian safety as well as vehicular safety, if I understand correctly.
That is true.
We get, but we do have people who walk from Lantern Hill, right? And they walk from Walmart and stuff and come down into our downtown. Many of them having children and such, the trailer park behind the mobile
They
home park.
mostly walk to Walmart and others on the south side.
They cut through that path that's in the back of Neola Park was created a lot, like from that traffic, from people from those areas.
Right. So what this brings up, as far as I can see, I think it's a great idea to improve pedestrian safety, but it's not a good idea to reduce the number of lanes for traffic of the motor vehicles.
Katie? Oh,
Sure, no, yeah, I do have things. I just wanted to say, that I agree with Shannon. I know people who personally have walked because they don't have a car or their car's in the shop or something like that from the city out to south side where they work. People who have to walk to work don't have a choice about the weather. And I think just to kind of tack on to what Elaine was saying, improving the safety and improving the walkability is also designed to increase the number of people who are using Lettuce Highway to walk and decrease the number of cars. So I think that's a goal of this project, and I think it's a good one for our community. I would like to say that I love the idea, I had this as a question and you answered it, of connectivity down into the most active spaces in Neola Park on the west side of the highway, because, you know, I think having to walk all the way down to the Maple Street where there's gonna be the roundabout and then back around Grand Street and in, it's just not, you know, doesn't make sense. So I think that's great that you've thought of that, and I'm excited to see that. And greater accessibility into the, gosh, why can't I think of what it's called? The bike path along the New Island. Thank you, my brain. Okay. I do have a question about option 1 versus option 2. And it's really about 2 things. One is, I think, practical, which is I, in my non-engineer brain, am having a hard time understanding how all the traffic pushed to the east side of the highway will then integrate seamlessly into the traffic circle. Because my understanding of traffic circles is that they're generally sort of evenly or at least disparately placed slip lanes, basically, to get out of there. So that just doesn't make sense to me, and maybe that is something that could be explained. The other thing is, I'm just wondering how that option came to be and how it became, I noticed in your presentation, the preferred project. Just because it's over budget, and there was no, fault necessarily identified with the first alternative, so I just wanna know like why the second one is preferable, other than they're having like a ton of space on one side. And then I'm also wondering if alternative 3, which is what I'm calling it in my brain, has ever been thought about, which is to have more of like a boulevard feel and put the walking lane and everything in the center and have trees, and then that would keep the traffic as far away from itself as it could be. That seems like it would be easier to integrate, again, very lay brain, into a traffic circle at the other end, and also you would have that crossover on the town side again. Yeah, and I know Greg and I have talked a little bit about the decision to make it 1 lane southbound and 2 lanes northbound, but in my estimation, it seems like it should be the opposite if we go with alternative 1 or whatever, just because you want to slow traffic down coming into the city to go into the one, like they're going to go into the traffic circle, right? It's one thing, but when you're going out to south side, there are like 4 or 5 different ways you can go, so think getting it out and moving makes more sense. But again, I'm not an engineer, I just always have lots of questions, so I appreciate you.
Steve, if you answer that, if you don't mind, and then we'll go to Cecilia.
Did you have something to follow up?
So,
Okay.
I have to make sure I got your questions.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, let's start at the beginning.
So the last graphic that I designed that I saw of the state's roundabout is that it's a single lane in and a single lane out.
Right.
So those, at some point, it's going to be those two lanes going northbound. So let's say
They
one
have to
lane
merge.
project development, the state's gonna merge those down into
Right.
a single lane.
Right.
To go into that roundabout.
Right.
So
Again, in my brain, it makes more sense to have them enter the roundabout as one and then come out of the roundabout and split into two. I don't know. That's just me.
So,
Please continue. Sorry.
no, I'm just trying to think about how to talk about it. So having on the west side of the highway, I know part of the intent was the connections to the park and kind of make sure that we had that. Flipping it over to the east side, I guess I'm just trying to think through what is in between and what would be there.
So I'm not suggesting flipping the traffic over to the east side.
Well, I'm saying putting the path on the east side and taking a lane away there.
I'm also, okay, I see what you're saying. Yep, sorry.
We have not looked at that. Like the west side was kind of part of the initial grant application, and that's what we were, focusing on.
And it makes sense in terms of connectivity to the park. I think in the center, in my brain, makes the most sense, because you could widen it, they could each be one lane, and it would be fine, basically all the way out to Southside. And I think it would make the most sense with interacting with the traffic circle. But then, you lose the connectivity to the park, so I get that.
Let me let Cecilia jump in.
Yeah, just to follow up, I think that it seems as if having that midway, you have to do some sort of analysis about whether or not that encourages walkability and other forms of transit. I don't know if it does necessarily, so. And as you point out, it could decrease then availability to the park, so. My question was actually a little bit afield, a little related. You mentioned in your schedule that there are public workshops going to be available. And I was just curious, given that you had already put forward a preference, what kind of engagement with the public you were looking for, what you had in mind?
I'm sorry, before you start, can I also bring my question back, which was about how option 2 became the preference?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm curious too.
So that was with coordination with Greg and Julie and Chris.
Okay.
So I can speak to that. Alternative 2, we were really looking at this, what is the best solution from the, if you go back to the slide at the beginning, of talking about the goals of the project, and not so much focusing just on the financials. Obviously, it's a little bit more expensive to do option 2. And we still haven't gotten DOT's, comments back on which they may prefer. But we were looking really, what is the best overall solution? Alternative 2, I think, is. So that's why we asked DOT to consider that our preferred. That doesn't mean we can't change because it's still a draft. So that's all still open to ultimately the council's decision.
So just to follow up with my question, sort of what were you looking for from the public in terms of engagement?
We want their comments. We want anything that they see as the locals, to be honest with you, that we don't.
Cool.
We don't know everything. And, we don't live here, but ultimately, if the public came out strongly against alternative 2, that's a discussion. And ultimately, the city has to be on board with what is moved forward. But it's, we have to say, okay, here's our initial preference. Here's what we think is the best alternative. If we go to that public meeting and it's absolutely not, this is a bad idea, this doesn't meet our community goals, well then our responsibility is to step back, reevaluate things, and decide how we want to move forward.
Okay.
Len?
Yeah, so Steve, thanks for coming tonight, I appreciate that. I find it interesting that your group, along with the New York State DOT, no one's done a pedestrian count. Then you would avoid all of this perspective. We're trying to make it safe, absolutely, but obviously there's other costs, reduction paths that we could have been on if that's what it's really all about. If beautification is another aspect, well then I understand why you guys are going down this path. I agree with Katie that the east side would actually make sense because that connects the bicyclists into their path that they've already beaten down already. And it does connect it to the park because that is Catella Park, that is part of Newer Park. So I don't think you lose anything to take a look at that. What's concerning to me is the simulation. I don't see where you've included the traffic circle in the simulation. Maybe that's just the graphics here in the simulation. So I'm interested in, did you actually take all that data? Because I went to the high school and I watched the simulation for the traffic circle. And that public hearing was, we were told it's a done deal. You get what you get, and we're done with this. So it kind of sounds like this is what's gonna happen at the next presentation, that they're not really gonna listen to the public. I gotta be honest with you, I fielded a lot of questions after that. It started from the high school door to my vehicle, and it didn't stop for several days after that. I find it concerning that the DOT is gonna make the decision when this council had to make the financial decision of investing $1.8 million before the financing. And I'm sure wherever she is, she's back there, is gonna tell me it's well over $2 million that we're investing in that project. And we're not gonna make the decision. I find that disappointing.
Okay, so first.
Pedestrian count, we never had an actual study of the pedestrian count.
Not unless there was one as part of the project.
I asked that,
Grant application or.
I asked that back then. The simulation doesn't actually include the traffic circle. It does?
Yes. Yeah, they provided their data to us as far as what was coming in and out of it. And so we have their numbers that are coming out of it, we have their projections, that's balanced in our model, if you will. But their intersection is so far away from the actual interstate ramps that it gives traffic time to kind of level out, if you will.
And then part of that traffic circle that I think the mayor has been trying to get them to come back to make a presentation in front of this body is that, I think, I don't know, Greg's on board now, but I've had serious concerns about the slip lane that they showed in the traffic circle in front of the post office. So there's actually 2 lanes going, one into the circle and then the slip lane to get out on Main Street. And there's a lot of pedestrian crossing right there. And that's even with them taking parking away in front of the post office. So we'll lose, I think it's 4 or 5 slots. So, I don't know, you have nothing to do with the traffic circle.
Glenn, I can speak to that a little bit. I don't believe they're proposing taking away the parking spaces in front of the post office, with the designs that I've seen.
They are or aren't?
They will not be going away, they'll stay. And then the slip lane issue, I had the same concern, why do we have slip lanes at the roundabout? And I don't know, we haven't seen their final design or the next iteration, but they seemed open to, we don't have the image here, not to go down a rabbit hole there, but they talked about modifying that. So it'll be a single lane coming through, so only 1 lane of traffic needs to be crossed by pedestrians, and then there will be kind of a split where there's a second lane. So it seemed to be an improvement from what they had originally shown us, but we'll have to see what they come back with.
Although we've made our expectations pretty clear to them.
Yeah, we stressed throughout, from the first time they proposed a project, that pedestrian and bicycle safety was the city's priority on that intersection.
If there's no one else, I want to.
No, I wanna just,
No, please.
I just wanna spin off a little about what Glenn is saying about Catella Park, because we have Neola Park on, one side of the road that takes people to downtown, and then people use the other side of the road to access the other side of town without going all the way down to Chestnut Street. So I think is there any version of this where we've worked that in?
What are you saying, like a connection down?
So, you know how there's both sides of the highway, as you're going across the highway? The one side, they've created a path to Neola Park, right on the one side.
Yep, so I go to the.
Opposite side of the highway, there's access to the other park and the soccer fields and the baseball fields or whatever, where the under the overpass, or under, yeah, the underpass behind back there.
On the east
That
side.
gives people access to the east side. So do we have any plans to develop that part, so people have access to east side?
So the only thing that we're doing is just, so when that slip ramp gets removed right there, is we're just extending that existing connection that you're referring to. So we're not doing any other work on the east side of Lettuce Highway.
Okay, so no, okay. Thank you.
The only thing that I wanted to say is that you seem to be putting a lot of thought into this, and I feel like you have really listened to us and our questions, and so I just want to thank you for that.
As do I. So thank you very much, Steve. And there's no doubt we'll be having more conversation around this as we move forward. Thank you again.
Thank you.
And Martine. So we have Martine Kemmerbeek, the Airport Commission Chair, and he's going to take us through an airport capital improvement plan.
Thank you, Mark, for the introduction. So tonight I would like to talk about the ACIP, the Airport Capital Improvement Plan. Every airport in New York State, and I believe in the country, has one of these that outlines the project that will be done. And there are two projects in particular I would like to talk about today. So I'm not sure who's controlling the slides, but okay, thank you, Terry. If you could go to the next slide, please. The first project is the on-airport obstruction clearance. This is more a maintenance type of project that we need to do. And what we'll be doing is taking trees down for around 14 acres on both sides of the runway. What that's going to do is that's going to improve the safety of the airport. In case like an airplane is a little bit too low, they're not going to hit the trees. So there's typically a glide path around 3 degrees. We make sure that far below 3 degrees is also clear. And those trees will be removed. And then the land will be grubbed, meaning that all the stumps will be removed, and it will be smoothed out so that we will not have any more trees growing. This project has a total sticker of around $430,000. And part of that is paid by the FAA, part by New York State, and 5% will be a local share for the city of Anianta. So that amounts to around $21,525. What that will do for us is that currently the PAPI, which means Precision Approach Path Indicator, is not functional. We're going to work with the FAA on bringing that back operational. What that does is when an airplane lands, they get a visual. You can see some lights next to the runway. There are 3 red lights, or 6 red lights if you can look up close. And the higher you get, the less red lights you see, and you're aiming for 2 red lights and 2 white lights. You're in the safety zone. So once we can get that instituted, that's a lot easier for jets who fly pretty fast to land at our airports. I've talked to pilots who mentioned that they're flying into the airport, but they're definitely not flying into our airport at night because the PAPI is not working. So this is a project that revolves around safety, and that's why the FAA, if you look at the numbers, the FAA is paying the majority of this, and they're willing to do that because this is regular maintenance that any airport has to do. I am all about transparency, so I wanted to give you all of the reasons why we should do this, and also what happens if we don't do this. And if you notice, everything for if we don't do it says likely, which means that that's not a given, but that may happen. So one of the things that could happen is if we don't remove those trees, the FAA will come in and say like, okay, it's not safe for you to land at the threshold of the runway. We're going to move the threshold. We're going to make your runway a little bit shorter. They could do that at both ends. Currently, we have 4,200 feet of runway. It's a little small, but we can have jet traffic, and we actually have quite a lot of it. Especially we have a lot of tourists flying in. And these are all details. I love to talk about this for hours, but I'll keep it short. Schools are out earlier in the south. The baseball camp's open, and we have a lot of tourists coming from the south, and they're flying in with pretty big jets, Challenger 350s. So if we're not doing that, we may have our runway threshold reduced, which means the runway is a little bit shorter. Any questions?
So sorry, no,
We were just wishing that was our
dreaming
life.
about having a plan because school is
It's
out.
okay, sorry.
So if that happens, the runway will be shorter, which means that certain airplanes can no longer land. Those jets that bring a lot of tourists to our area may not be able to land here. How do we make profit on the airport? Well, there's two things. You rent hangars, which the city of Anianta does very successfully, and we charge money on fuel. If you can imagine, an itty-bitty little airplane doesn't take a lot of fuel, a jet does. So we make a lot of money from these jets. So if the runway is shorter and we can't get jets, we're not going to be able to get the same amount of fuel sales. Also, at this point, the Common Council earlier on approved the design of this project. The FAA has also matched graciously 90% of that. So we are currently on the list with the FAA to have this paid. If we are not doing this, that could hurt the relationship with the FAA. Some of you who were here for the parallel taxiway may remember what happened back then, and that didn't help our relationship. This is the one project. Any questions about on-airport obstruction clearance?
You're good, Martin.
Then the next slide is about the automated weather observation station. What we're going to do here is we are going to relocate this from one side of the runway to the other side of the runway. And I invite all of you, everybody in this room, come up to the airport. My email address is on the website. Send me an email, I'll meet you there. If I'm lucky enough, I'll even ask an instructor if we can do a short flight. What we're going to do is we're going to move the weather station from one side to the other side of the runway. This is part of the upgrade that we're doing to the weather station, but also it will allow us to open up a lot of space. And we have interest from private investors that would like to build their own hangar there, no cost to the city, and then be able to house their airplanes, which in the end will result in selling more fuel. And more fuel means more revenue for the airport. So this is a great project that's going to help us move forward with being able to lease land.
Okay.
Thank you. How does a private hangar on a public airport land work? Like, how does it work? Because we wouldn't own it, right?
No.
We would own it. So could you just explain that process to me a little bit?
Yes, it would be, we would be leasing the land to whoever is building the hangar.
Okay.
And there are some details surrounding it too that I think Glenn Carson would maybe have more insight in. I believe there's a 20-year lease on those, right?
Yeah, we worked with our city attorney several years ago to create that land lease, and there's options within it. But obviously, the city never totally gives up its ability to reclaim the land. But after a certain time period, we would reclaim it, and the building becomes part of the city infrastructure.
Yeah, that sounds. That's cool. Thank you.
And of course, if they're building a hangar, they're going to have airplanes. And if you have an airplane and you fly, you probably get fuel. And if you get fuel, we get revenue.
Okay.
So, maybe another thing about the weather, the automated weather observation station is, when I first started being involved with the airport, I thought like, oh, that's nice, we understand what the weather is. But this is actually something that pilots use. When they fly in, they start listening to the weather around 10 miles out, and they understand like which runway to use. Every runway has two ends, and you have to pick one of them where you want to land. So they know if it's safe, they know where the wind's coming from, they learn a lot about the airport and how they have to land the airplane. So again, transparency. The next step will be bids have been received, and at some point the Common Council will have to either approve or deny the bid. And if this is not done, then we will not be able to move the weather station, and we will no longer be able to use that land to work on the land lease. Again, the New York State Department of Transportation already graciously has promised us money, so they're already expecting us to also see this project. and the project itself has been approved. Any questions? Anybody would like to see the airport?
So this would also give an opportunity for the FAA to update their package.
Yes.
So it's kind of, again, another partnership that once we do this land clearing, they're gonna come in and update their equipment.
Yes.
And then the pilots that are coming in will be happy
Yes.
that are bringing the tours.
And the copy is probably still good enough, we just need to have it recertified. So they'll do a flyover a couple of times to make sure everything's copacetic.
Right, but that's the FAA's equipment.
Yes.
And Martijn, I heard your invitation to any council member that wants to come up and take a tour, that they might even find themselves aloft.
I cannot promise that, that's something I cannot promise, but I'll do my best.
Appreciate the clarification. I think you might see some council members.
Anytime, stop on up. It's a wonderful airport, we're very lucky to have this here. It's used for a lot of different purposes. We had family use it this weekend for medical emergency, to be able to connect family members. So it's used for a lot of different things. We have helicopters sometimes stationed there to look at the power lines, make sure that during days like today, we have a grid that's working.
Thank you, Martijn. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we have one last presentation, the Oneonta Armory Structure Report, and Steve Yearley and Shane Pangman will kind of take us through that, please.
Okay, now we're the good presentation. So this is the City of Oneonta Armory report. We did this as part of a structure report on the armory. We received the results of that approximately a year ago, but we finally got around to providing a kind of a synopsis of what's actually in that report, because it's kind of beefy. Next slide. Okay, so the armory was built by George L. Hines. He was born in 1860, he died in 1907. Born in Philadelphia, he attended MIT, where he met Christopher Grant Lafarge. The two men worked under Henry Hobson Richardson. This is a church they helped him design in Trinity. It's Trinity Church in Boston. This particular structure is pretty important in understanding this particular architect, because this creates what's called the Richardsonian Romanesque style of architecture. So basically, Hines and Lafarge, after they worked with Richardson there, they decided to go into business themselves in New York City, where they designed several important structures, including the Cathedral of St. John the Divine, Astor Court, which is part of the Bronx Zoo, the Cathedral of St. Matthew the Apostle, the Chapel of the Most Holy Trinity at West Point, the military academy. And then he also, while designing all these like cool, crazy buildings, does the Interborough Rapid Transit Company structures. So he designs like some subway, entrances, you know, kind of accessory structures, just kind of a bunch of random stuff. And then he does a Washington DC municipal building. So if we go to the next slide, here's some examples of stuff that they kind of constructed. So on the left, you see the cathedral, the municipal building in Washington DC is on the right. There's a couple subway structures. So they do a lot of really kind of impressive, crazy architectural buildings. All right, hop to the next slide. This is actually the Cathedral of the Divine there. It's the fourth largest cathedral of its kind, so it's a very imposing structure. The weird copper dome thing was originally supposed to be a giant spire that they never actually built. So it's called, it's belovedly known as the Chapel of the Unfinished. So it's kind of there as it sits. All right, pop to the next slide. So, in 1899, he's appointed the New York State architect by Theodore Roosevelt, and he gets into designing armory buildings, because that's naturally what you progress. Your progression is from these massive, amazing cathedrals to municipal armory buildings. He designed several other buildings, including the studio buildings in Albany. When we look at armory structures, he does Flushing, Geneva, Gloversville, Medina, East Main Street Armory in Rochester, Oneonta's Armory, the West Jefferson Armory, and the Oswego Armory. The Gloversville and the Oneonta Armory are identical. So these are kind of like pattern buildings. They're all done in kind of the same style, the castellated Richardsonian Romanesque style. It was constructed in 1905, it was begun in 1904. It was a cost of $50,000, and it served the National Guard Army until 2003 when we purchased it for $1. So there's a photo of the original armory with the entrance there, and the kind of rusticated stonework on the base, which is part of this particular architectural style. All right, next slide. This armory replaced the original armory, which you can see right here. So the armory we have now is a second rendition, a larger armory. This first armory was torn down to build the 1905 version. All right, next slide. Our armory's on the National Register. It's on the National Register because it fits this really weird criterion for its association with American military history in general and the National Guard in particular. Part of this criteria is associated with the idea that the National Guard is kind of a bulwark of the American military system. It has cultural importance because of that. And it's kind of a weird criteria, but that's why it's on there. Not because it's especially architecturally important, despite the easy argument now that it probably is architecturally important based on the person who designed it. Interestingly, the photo on the right is the 107th Infantry. They're posed in front of our armory before they headed off to France for World War I. All right, next slide. So the current condition, we have a gymnasium, we have a teen center, we have city court storage, we have general city storage, we have public safety training space, and then we also rent areas of the armory for use, technically. All right, next slide. So these are some interior photos. These were taken during, these are actually found in the report. So these are just kind of the general conditions inside the armory. As you can see, the teen center, the large gymnasium, random storage, etc. The importance of this gymnasium is it was originally part of a kind of a drill field. It was where the men were formed up and reviewed. So as you can see in the photo, there's kind of a balcony there. That's the reviewing stand where officers and NCOs would stand and then would form the gymnasium. The gymnasium is an important part of this structure that we'll kind of get to later. All right, next slide. These are some images of the current conditions that were noted by the structural engineer. As you can see on the top left, there's failing paint in the basement due to moisture. The gymnasium roof, because there's roof leaks throughout that area, you can kind of see where that beadboard ceiling is deteriorating. Most of what we have is water infiltration coming into that building. And when water gets in, it's always bad. So most of these images, and most of the images throughout the report are due to water coming into the building. All right, next slide. This is the exterior, kind of same thing. On the right, you see kind of the scalding, that rusticated stonework in the front. Part of it is water infiltration into the mortar. The kind of balcony there in the front, kind of that same thing. We have water coming in, water when it hits wood, when it hits stone, when it freezes, when it thaws. Always bad, always causes failure. Okay, next. So included in this report was a use and cost estimate. Part of this was developed by kind of looking at uses in the building code. So in the building code, we have like business uses, public assembly, residential. Depending on those uses, it triggers different code requirements for how buildings are retrofitted. So if you look like on the cost summary, which is directly from our report, you can see residential use with use center, business use with use center, business use, no use center. So the way that this was kind of, when they say no use center, what they're referring to are upgrades or changes to the basement floor outside of adding sprinkler protection to it. As you work into these different uses, you trigger sprinkler. The sprinkler requirement for most buildings in New York State is anything residential that isn't a single family or two family home, and anything that is an occupant load more than like, basically we'll just call it 50. Once you start to move into these mixed use buildings, sprinklers become a real thing. So what we're seeing on these first floor, second floor, third through fifth floor, which is the tower, these costs are based on a square footage estimate that is attached to what type of building use it would be. So as you can see, they're fairly high. These are based on kind of what the person, the engineer and the architect making this report kind of felt were average costs for this type of construction work in this age of the building. Okay, next slide. As part of this survey, we did, or as part of this condition survey, we did a use survey that was kind of attached to how that cost estimate was created. So if we look at the reuse survey, the top 4 uses were recreation, children and family outreach services, special events, and community service, resources, and warning center. So again, those were kind of the big ticks. Those are kind of the big themes that are already kind of going on in that building. And that's kind of where those cost estimates were generated off of. Go ahead and click to the next slide. Okay, so conclusions to this is the building is structurally sound. The architect and the structural engineer said basically the building is what it is. It needs maintenance, but it's not in any imminent danger of collapse or any sort of failure. A roof repair or replacement is listed as one of the major projects that needs to be done on this building. And this is going to be true of any historic structure. The roof is kind of a critical part of keeping these types of buildings together. Repointing is another critical part that prevents that kind of the delamination of the stone and the failure of the brick. They recommended a replacement of the front ramp, not only because it's historically not sensitive to the structure, but also in order to accommodate better ADA compliance, the front ramp will need to be replaced. The east fire escape is in a state of kind of failure, so they recommended a replacement of that. Further review of the tower stairs and framing. Those are old structures. They kind of met their kind of life expectancy. The way they were built at the time is not what we would consider best practices in current construction. Sprinkler is going to also be a major component of that building. By adding a sprinkler, you allow a much greater, many more options for like what you can use that building for. And then you have just generic repairs are noted. Plaster, woodwork, ceiling, like just kind of just generic interior maintenance issues. I kind of included in this, the gymnasium becomes a really important part of the structure because one, when we purchased it, there's an agreement that that gymnasium would be for public recreation. Two, any future use of that building, especially anything that tries to use tax credits or any sort of historic preservation incentives, that is a defining characteristic of that type of building. And it is likely that SHPO would not approve that gymnasium being turned into anything but a large open room. And that's just part of that building. So that's part of what we kind of see with restrictions as far as that kind of space is concerned. All right, next slide. So historic preservation tax credits, obviously the city is not going to really be able to take advantage of these, but in the future, if we were to partner with a private developer, sell the building, however this plays out, you have federal historic tax credits. You get up to 20% of a 20% tax credit on your income taxes. You can couple that with the state, which is another 30%. And then there's a local law called a 444A, which is basically a deferred local tax, like your real estate. So like what would happen then is you can kind of offset your improvements up to 10 years. So you can couple all of these things together to kind of create a funding package or at least create an incentive to do some of the improvements that are needed on this building. When we see that happen, so the Ford block, obviously Springbrook's taking advantage of those, Chip Klugo's obviously taking advantage of those. So we've seen those tax credits really effectively work in our downtown. All right, next slide. So this was kind of a cool thing that's kind of coupled with the Armory and why it's important. Again, here's our same guys formed up in front of the Armory. The guys in their plain clothes are guys that have just enlisted. This is prior to them leaving for World War I. If you go to your next slide, this is those same guys on a boat headed to France, where they would later find themselves at the Somme Offensive, which was one of the largest battles in human history. There's about a 33% casualty rate. So there were 3 million people involved in that, and about 1 million of them did not make it. So yeah, it's a really interesting part of Louisiana's history. And I included kind of a quote with that, like, old places foster community by giving people a sense of shared identity through landmarks, history, memory, and stories. By having the attributes that foster community, such as distinctive character, walkability, by serving as shared places where people meet and gather. So the Armory is kind of an example of that, because even though it has like a very military history, and it's kind of it kind of embraces that idea of like this common identity, like a shared understanding of like how our communities are impacted. Like all these people in this picture, Dave Merzig's grandfather is one of them, maybe not in this picture, but he was actually involved with this little section of history. This all kind of touched everyone's lives. It's touched all of our lives in Oneonta. This was a functioning armory until 2003. So we as a community have been involved in kind of this structure and what it means, for about 100 years. So in closing, the armory is not going to cave in. And that's what our report found. But also, like, I think that we kind of owe it to the armory to figure out what we kind of want to do with it in the future. All right, next slide, which I think is the end. Yes.
Thank you, Steve. Before we take questions, Judy, do you have something?
I didn't have any slides here because what I wanted to talk about for a few minutes completely depend on the ownership and the use of the building. So I'm not going to get into too much detail, but I just wanted to talk for a second about there are grants available depending on who owns it and what it's used for. It could be from the New York Main Street program, which has a stabilization grant similar to what the Oneonta Theater is able to have. That program also offers the Downtown Anchor project, which the Armory could be considered a downtown anchor. There's also community development block grant funds for public facilities that can go towards mainly ADA compliance, elevators, things like that. There's the Environmental Protection Fund, which has historic preservation funding, and that can go towards renovation. There's a lot of restrictions with that. There's a lot of restrictions after you accept the money for how the building can be used. So without going into a lot of detail, because I just don't know what grants we could use, I will say there are opportunities out there. We just have to determine what we're doing with the armory, who's going to own it, what it's going to be used for, and then we can figure out, grant programs. Private developers would have access to funds that the city doesn't have. Nonprofits have access to some of the funding I just mentioned, and they have access to other funding. So it's a big wide open canvas right now.
And that's kind of like, if you look at those cost comparisons, there's a large spread of costs because, like the architect notes in the report, if you were to do residential stuff here, well, now you have to install kitchens and bathrooms. And so the cost of constructing residential units, if that was part of a mixed use project, that drastically impacts the cost versus just having office space and a teen center and a gymnasium. So like, that's kind of, even these costs are very spread based on what type of renovation you're doing. And that's noted in the full report.
Okay. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Judy. Let me open this up to council. Has anybody any thoughts, questions, comments that they'd like to? Yes, Cecilia.
Yeah, I just was curious, in your presentation, you mentioned that the city purchased this armory for $1. And I was curious what the city, if you had any idea, I mean, this was now over 20 years ago, if you had any idea what the city had in mind, sort of what the city plans were for this building.
I think it was slated for demolition or something. I think
No, what it was is that the National Guard when they left, they were abandoned the facility and it was up for disposition. And the city, Mayor Mueller specifically requested as to whether the city could purchase it as an option. And that was determined that in fact the city could take it over $1 as long as the deed into the city continued to be used for recreational purposes for the benefit of the city.
And hence the need for us to continue to maintain that aspect of the program.
And I think like, even just from a practical standpoint, like, the gymnasium portion of that building is a defining characteristic of that building architecturally. So no matter who takes over that building, that gymnasium is not gonna change. I mean, it's just not a part of it. It wouldn't be permitted if you were using any sort of historic tax credits or any sort of historic preservation incentives.
I just add that, the gymnasium and the teen center are the two most well-utilized areas of the building. The gymnasium has.
And they
basketball,
rank the highest.
volleyball, soccer, yeah, the community seems to support that. It's the other portions of the building that have been underutilized over the years, the rentable space that hasn't really been rented very often, so.
Do we have, Scott?
We're doing a discussion, you say, right? Isn't that,
Yes.
isn't that a discussion?
Yes. Yes.
I'll wait until then.
Okay. All right, well, if there's, Jenny?
May I ask a question?
Yes.
In the cost estimates, was there a consideration for lead paint, asbestos, and things like that?
Yeah, so what they did was they basically came up with, I hate to use the word generic, but they came up with a cost estimate per square foot of building. And that was based on, I mean, they are a firm that does historic preservation, architecture, and design work. So they're using costs based on what they've experienced in the field doing these types of projects. So that's where those numbers came from.
All right, well, very good. Len?
Steve, thanks for the in-depth report. A lot of this, we appreciate that. The timeline on this is about a year since the report came back. What are you anticipating that the numbers that we're looking at? I'm on page 46 of 67 of your report, looking at those numbers.
Right.
So,
I'm sure they've gone up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, those are estimates at the time. I'm sure that they've gone up.
Yeah.
I mean, those prices will only continue to go up.
Right.
They're post-COVID though, so
Yeah.
they're not gonna go up. They're post-COVID numbers, so they're not gonna go up like the numbers went up for construction during COVID. So there's that, so it's probably, I would say it's typical inflation.
Yeah, that's what they're gonna
Not-
continue to
Not
increase.
COVID inflation, that was crazy.
Yeah, so in municipal work, are you seeing like a 10 to 15% annual?
I don't know, Greg, do you know, first, you know?
3.5 to 4?
That's
3.5 to
typical.
4?
That's an escalation.
All the work on the city state prevailing wage, right?
Yeah. Right, that's.
I mean, so I think part of what we're looking at here is we would have to decide whether we're going to do this work or whether we would want to theoretically sell the building and have someone else do this work. I mean, that's kind of I think that's what you guys are gonna discuss.
Right.
I'm just presenting on what was in the report.
But I think Scott brings up a good point, Steve, is that the numbers that we're looking at, is that based on municipal rates?
No,
Oh.
no.
Oh.
No, this report was done just this is what people are charging to do this type of work in this particular professional
Okay,
experience.
gotcha. Yeah, that's a whole different look when we go to prevailing rate, so. Okay.
All righty, I see no other hands, so Steve, Judy, thank you very much, appreciate it. I hadn't heard from any liaisons from boards, commissions, or task forces if there are any presentations to make here, and so we'll move to our committee reports, starting with our Community Wellness Committee and Councilmember Horace.
So we met on June 5th. It was myself and Bryce Wooden. We had a presentation where we received training on how to administer naloxone from a presenter from the Narcan Community Initiative. I definitely got that wrong. Kathy just left, but she'll tell me. And that was great and very informative. And then we spoke to Jeff House regarding Community Bicycle Repair Program. This is something that he does in his, I think he's retired, in his free time. He fixes up bikes and gives them to people. And we were discussing ways that we might be able to partner with him to encourage his project. It's all, totally free, totally volunteer time. So we were talking about some ways that we might be able to partner. It's a good word. And then we discussed this chess programming thing that Bryce Wooden is working on with Kings of Excellence on campus. And Liz Speller from Job Corps, they are going to be tentatively on July 13th after the farmer's market. There's going to be a chess orientation tournament kind of event, which might be cool. That's TBD though. He didn't have confirmation on the date, but I'm just sharing it in case that is the date, so you guys can all mark it down. And that's it.
Okay, thank you very much. Do we have any questions? Thank you very much, Kate. Moving on to our legislative committee report, and Councilmember Carson.
We met June 10th. We had some local filming experts come to the meeting. Unfortunately, there was one that didn't get the invite, and so we had a very good discussion, but we're gonna continue it at the 24th. I guess that's a good segue, is that Carrie is noticing on the schedule, we agreed to meet on the 24th, did we not?
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Okay. That gives you
No,
the
but
answer. You got me second guessing myself.
I have it in my
Yeah.
minutes reflected a different date, so I wanted to clarify.
Oh,
So,
well, we're good
Wait,
on
what
the
happened?
24th, right?
minutes reflected a different date,
The
so
only thing I'll
I
say
wanted to clarify that it was happening on the 24th.
is that the local waterfront revitalization project public thing is that day at that same time. So we may want, I want to go to that too, so we may want to change it.
We probably,
Do you need to go to the waterfront? Because I already took time off from work
Oh,
to make
no.
it to these meetings, so.
yeah, I don't need to go to the waterfront.
Okay,
Do you?
I'll make it work.
Do you mind us talking about?
No, I can maybe
Well, no,
come and
because
then.
she's bringing one of the other experts.
That's okay.
Are you bringing an expert?
I am bringing an expert. It's like bring an expert to the legislative committee. I am bringing an expert, but no, I can go there because it starts at 4:30. It's at 5.
So the public meeting is from 4:30 to 7,
Okay.
but it's an open house.
Yeah.
Anybody want?
Okay. Yeah. So I may just
You can
leave
slide,
early so I
slide.
can go because I want to go. Thanks.
And then we worked ourselves, I think, to the end of the fee schedule, if I remember correctly. So, I think we're just about done with the fee schedule as it stands. So we will meet on the 24th at 5 o'clock.
Yeah, I'll be there.
With an expert.
I'll bring an expert.
I'm bringing an expert.
Good. Questions for Lynn? Okay, thank you very much, Lynn. We are going to have a Finance and HR Committee meeting on June 27th at 5 p.m. And I want to...
Chair of the new, I guess, resuscitated finance and HR committee. As the mayor mentioned, we're going to be meeting on June 27th, next week. And really in the overall interest of efficiency and effectiveness, I really see the committee engaging in the financial concerns at both a micro and a macro level. So I really just thought about 3 areas that the committee could focus on just in the forthcoming weeks and months prior to the budget planning process. So on the broader level, the wider level, the committee, I would like to see be working to combine both the strategic planning process with the budget planning process and really tackle how these 2 processes may converge, may come together. So, on a sort of practical level, we could investigate how might our city services meet the expectations in terms of public demand. So that's item number 1, and then on a more kind of smaller micro level, to really look at streamlining financial processes and procedures as they relate to the council, so to create a more efficient, manageable workflow, and to really ensure that the processes involving the council provide accountability, and a process of checks and balances on the financial decision making.
And then lastly, I would like to investigate the possibility of increasing partnerships with similar-sized municipalities that face the same or similar financial challenges and issues as our city. So looking at what are best practices across the financial health of cities that are comparable to ours. To really look at how do other cities similar to ours in size identify challenges and then really work to confront those challenges. So I see those 3 items as at least an initial pathway, and of course additions to this list are going to be provided as the committee meets. We haven't met yet, so this is all to be continued in some sense, and that we would provide consistent, transparent reports to the council.
Should also mention that Scott and Don are the other 2 members
Yes.
of that committee. Anybody have any questions or comments for Susie? Yes, Lon.
I think it's great that you're going to be looking at similar cities of similar sizes and what are they doing. Did you kind of start making a list of which cities you're thinking about?
I have reached out to, at least in my own research, the city of Fairport, New York. As something, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, as a city, it's adjacent to a much larger city, so in that way, they're a little distinct from us, but they've been doing quite a bit in terms of economic development of Main Street. So it's actually quite dynamic in terms of what they've been doing.
Fairport is also the city that wound up dealing with the lift bridge issue that I've referenced so many times. They're just this side of Rochester, I believe it is.
Yes.
Yeah.
If you don't mind, I would suggest maybe Cortland, Plattsburgh, and Owego.
Owego, right.
They're very similar to our demographics.
Don, did you have something?
Where is the first city that you mentioned? Where is that?
Fairport, New York? It's right outside of Rochester, in Monroe County.
I couldn't remember exactly, but I was there once and now I remember. It's,
yes.
We've
done quite a bit in terms of economic.
It's on the lake?
It's on the canal.
Erie Canal. On the Erie Canal.
Oh, it's on the Erie Canal?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
It was a long time ago.
Yes. It's changed quite a bit.
So we're excited to see this, and we thank you very much for taking this on, Cecilia. And with that, we'll move into our approval of warrants. Starting with motion number 1, that the Common Council approves the warrants totaling $704,848.14, and that the same be placed on the Director of Finance's desk for payment as presented. Do I have a motion to approve? Okay. Elaine, followed by Don, and Paul.
Councilmember Mosher Campbell.
Aye.
Councilmember Walsh Russo.
Aye.
Councilmember McHugh.
Aye.
Councilmember LaPartishue.
Aye.
Councilmember Carson.
Yes.
Councilmember Harrington. Councilmember Wooden. Councilmember Matheson.
Yes.
All right, before we move into the consent agenda, I just want to take a moment and acknowledge Brock Davis, who's been moved to the position of maintenance worker, and also to Matthew Rishi, who is now found himself a position as motor equipment operator, and then finally Angela Miller, who is moved into the administrative specialist role. And do we have a motion to approve the consent agenda? Yes, Don, followed by Cecilia, and we can take our vote.
Councilmember Mosher Campbell.
Aye.
Councilmember Walsh Russo.
Aye.
Councilmember McHugh.
Aye.
Councilmember LaPartishue.
Aye.
Councilmember Carson.
Yes.
Councilmember Harrington.
Yes.
Councilmember Matheson.
Yes.
Very good. Which takes us to the city administrator's report. Great.
I'll just take some questions tonight if there are any, in the interest of time.
Okay. Somebody got any questions for Greg?
I got.
Yes.
So we did that tour of the water plant.
Did you have fun?
I thought it was gonna be an hour. 3 hours later, we're finally wrapping up. Down in the basement of the water plant, which I never knew there was a basement in the water plant, by the way. Great tour. as we're talking about infrastructure concerns, as we're talking about what our water department does, I'm not sure maybe the general public knows exactly how intense it really is. So I was wondering if that same exact tour that we took, if maybe we could put some type of video together from the start, because we went from the start, right up from the reservoir, all the way down through. If we could put something like that together and have it out there so that the public knows it, so they know exactly what it's, and like even the tanks where we got the concrete work and stuff, we don't, just put it all out there. Like, this is exactly how things work, this is what we're investing in, this is what we have to fix, this is why it's costing us so much money, this is why we're doing these increases to get from point A to point B. I think that would really help for people to understand how the water really truly gets to them. I think they understand the street part, that it's in the mains, but I don't think they really understand that we got like, I don't know how many tanks, I forgot, I think there were like 6 tanks or something like that. And exactly how it goes and how that our people actually get down into the tanks to clean them. And how they have to close the stuff and how they have to do all this. It's a long story short, I know I'm babbling, but it was an impressive thing. I just think if we could get some type of video like that out, so people can understand that that's what we're investing in, because, in the lab, I don't think people understand what the lab does either. So.
Scott,
It's a good idea.
Scott, I can, Don?
I'll make it.
Oh, look at you. I was gonna say I can talk to some professionals out there, but apparently we have a professional in here, so.
I'd be happy to do it. We could decide how long it should be and exactly what we want to focus on, but, or we can make multiple ones. I can do it.
Nice.
Kind of along those lines, it was very impressive.
Yes.
I was actually overwhelmed with the amount of data and information that came out of our city staff. It was very impressive. Scott that's in charge of the water treatment plant was very impressive. Stan has picked a very good person for succession, but one that caught me off guard was actually Chris Iacobucci. He had answers like this, and I finally said, how do you know this? And he said, well, for 21 years, this is what I did, I designed these things. So another asset of Chris Iacobucci is that he knows our water and probably our wastewater treatment plants inside and out. So when he's not busy felling trees or trying to, but.
If I can raise a point of personal privilege, when I was 16 years old, my first real job, with the city of Oneonta, reading water meters. And I went around to all the basements everywhere in Oneonta, including all the bars, reading water meters. And when I was done with that, I was assigned to the water treatment plant. In the water treatment plant, I was given a big brush, steel, bristle brush. And I went up and down to that facility and brushed down all the pipes and repainted all the pipes on all the levels.
Wow.
Well, you missed the spot.
I'm sure right now they're rusting through. But it was that first job gave me a love of infrastructure. That is, you have no idea what goes on underground.
It's wild.
In the city. Just the fact that it went down, then went down, then went down another flight, and went down a flight. You see from the outside, it looks like a single story building, but it is a fascinating machine.
Yeah. Well, even the Wilbur Lake, there's so much going on underneath
Absolutely.
it. You just don't even know. It's so serene out there. So yeah, it was really
Educating
incredible
the
to
talk
work.
about infrastructure is always a good thing.
So we'll look forward to the video.
That when we passed, I didn't know when we were passing the ballot project, what we were really getting into until they really to see it complete and everything that was done, and you're like, okay, and there's what, 500 some million gallons of water in the top waters.
Wild. Yeah.
Never thought that was that big, not that much.
550 and 50 for the next.
Okay, well, again, Don, thank you for volunteering.
Right, we can figure out a schedule and how long you want it and all of that.
Sure.
3 hours.
3 hours. Yeah, right. No edits.
Well, TikTok is usually 15 seconds.
All right, any other questions for Greg? Any other questions for Greg? All right, we'll dispense with the mayor's remarks tonight in favor of moving this thing along. Discussion agenda motion number 9, that the Common Council authorizes the city administrator to sign and submit an attestation form to the New York State Department of Criminal Justice Services, DJCS, as part of the Law Enforcement Technology Program to accept a grant of $142,777 to fund the purchase of a new in-car video and license plate reader, LPR, system and the new fixed LPR assets for the Oneonta Police Department, and further authorizes the city administrator to sign all documents and agreements necessary to complete the project, subject to review by the city attorney. The Common Council further authorizes any necessary budget amendments and transfers. Do I have a motion to approve? Len?
Second.
Followed by Katie, and discussion.
I had a question on this one. I looked up license plate readers, so I'm very clear on what that is. I guess what I had a question was about what fixed LPR assets are specifically.
So, vehicle LPR is active and they can be used by the officers in the vehicles to pick up on stolen vehicles, some violations, vehicles that are put in where we might have like an Amber Alert. They'll put the plate in that we might be looking for, and it will give an audible to the officer, so they're very interactive. The fixed LPRs are fixed in place. They're much like a fixed in place surveillance camera. And all they do is just, for historical. So if we happen to have, if we're looking, for instance, for a stolen vehicle, we can search a database to see if it's passed through. Continue ongoing investigations, it could be handy. So let's say there's a narcotics distribution case where there's identifiable license plates. We would be able to see when the vehicles come into the city and when they leave, and maybe establish a pattern for a past crime. If we happen to come up with a vehicle, we'd be able to use that as evidence, but not as active as like the police car ones. And to be clear, it's not necessarily new. We have LPRs, we've had them for about 20 years. This is an integrated system with the in-car video cameras, and is supported by Axon, who does both the in-car cameras and body cameras for the officers.
Further discussion? We've lost Katie, but I think that's good. Nothing else to discuss?
Yeah, I just had that question. That was all. Thank you. That was exactly what I wanted to know.
Scott didn't make the other votes. Scott didn't make the other votes.
Here we are. All right, so I think we can call the vote.
Councilmember Mosher Campoli.
Aye.
Councilmember Walsh Russo.
Aye.
Councilmember McHugh.
Aye.
Councilmember LaPartie.
Aye.
Councilmember Carson.
Yes.
Councilmember Harrington.
Yes.
Councilmember Matheson.
Yes.
Okay, very good, thank you. Motion number 10, that the Common Council approves the following resolution. Whereas the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, has made available a grant program to which the Albert S. Nader Regional Airport is eligible to apply, and whereas the City of Oneonta desires to apply for a grant, the project being described as on airport obstruction removal - construction, by committing funds for the local match, funding shares being FAA 90%, New York State Department of Transportation, NYSDOT 5%, and local 5%. Now therefore be it resolved that the City of Oneonta Common Council hereby endorses and approves the project being described as the on-airport obstruction removal - construction for the total project amount not to exceed $430,483, with a local share not to exceed $21,525, and it is further resolved that the City of Oneonta Common Council make available all necessary funds to match the FAA and NYSDOT grant share of funds for said project, and further resolved that the mayor is hereby authorized to execute all necessary agreements on behalf of the City of Oneonta with the FAA in connection with the project, and it is further resolved that this resolution shall take effect immediately. Do I have a motion to approve? Len, followed by Elaine. Discussion. Take a vote.
Councilmember Moser Campoli.
Aye.
Councilmember Walsh Russo.
Aye.
Councilmember McHugh.
Aye.
Councilmember Lepari Shu.
Aye.
Councilmember Carson.
Yes.
Councilmember Harrington. Councilmember Marcuson.
Yes.
All right, we have a discussion topic here of the Market Street Transportation Improvement Projects, a review of the budget, which everybody has now in front of them, and I'll let Greg take it from here.
Yeah, so this is our first take at a budget update format. If you wanna, we can talk about whether this is what you're looking for on a monthly basis. Essentially, what you see across each of the columns indicates different budget code that is representing the different projects that are listed: Water Street improvements, Market Street improvements, the transit hub, the stair and elevator tower, the parking garage demolition, and the parking lot. The parking garage demolition project is nearly complete. I think there's one change order left for some work to be finished, and then just a closeout process. The budgeted line, which is the first line, obviously projected costs. The budgeted line, if you look over on the very right, $23,266,854. If you were to look back at the budget motions that were adopted by council in December of last year, that's the number you would see as a total. Projected costs are the current contracts that we've awarded. In the case of the parking garage demolition, that's the actual costs that have been incurred. In the case of something like the transit hub, where we haven't really started construction of that project yet, or it's just about to get underway, that's the contracts that have been awarded, as well as any change orders on these projects that have been approved or have been identified. So then, final line contingency is the difference between the two. So if you look in the bottom right corner of the table, $1.9 million is the breathing room we have, if you will. Essentially, when we think about the $7.5 million bond that the city had authorized up to that amount, this would mean that we're below that amount by almost $2 million at this point in the project. I would anticipate that 1.9 to go down. I wouldn't anticipate it to go all the way down to zero and use all of that authorized bond amount. But given where we're at in the project, it's early on with most of these, other than the demo. There's still going to be some change orders that come up, things that change throughout the project. The actual unit price costs at the end will, the numbers will vary. So you'll see some changes. This is what we're looking to track on a monthly basis. If this is simple enough and what you're looking for, I can keep this. If you're looking for something a little different, we can talk about how it might be different. I guess just overall Market Street improvements, that's the project obviously is ongoing. There, I would say, 20% or so through that, roughly on pace to finish by the end of the summer. That project has had some change orders that we've approved and that we've looked at. However, we don't see that having any real other significant changes. Obviously, there are things underground you might find that you don't know are there, and that could be result in some changes. But for the most part, we don't see any concerns across the whole project. We're well within budget. We don't see any glaring obstacles to completing the project. The last note I would make, and it's a note on here, that the NYSEG temporary and permanent electric utility relocation costs are included in the parking garage demo costs. So the demo of the garage itself didn't cost that $2.953. It includes the relocation cost.
So, let me go to Len, because I think this is.
Yeah, no, I like the format, Greg. It's very simplistic, it works. So with the parking garage demo, that 411.9, or basically 412,000, you're allowed to utilize those funds elsewhere within the project, or are you limited?
We can, so essentially that bottom line, it's all general fund money. So it can be used for any general fund purpose. So it could be transferred to other columns in the project as needed.
And then with the Market Street improvements, I apologize. So right now, the projected cost, that's not what we've expended. That's just the bids, correct?
Right, projected costs is the total bids, including any change orders that have been authorized or anticipated. So we haven't spent that amount yet, but we're projecting to spend that amount.
You mentioned the percentage of the work being done.
Guesstimate. They're moving along. I don't know if Chris, you would agree, about 20%.
Yeah, I'd say about 20%.
There's Spectrum has a crew out there today as well.
They're about 20% complete. Thank you.
there's some coordination work between the utility. Spectrum is out there, I believe, today. I think with Spectrum, Verizon has some work, NICEC has their work as well, so that will be ongoing, so you'll see multiple crews at a time.
Thank you.
Anybody else have anything for Greg on this? Yes, Don.
Is there any possibility of using some of the space that's in where the garage was as temporary parking?
Not in the immediate future. That project, Boland's construction will be on site soon, beginning work there. There's gonna be a temporary construction staging area, so a lot of activity going on. It won't be conducive to having temporary parking right away. I'm not sure, and I can't really say whether the parking lot might be opened up before the entire project is finished. Maybe that could happen in the spring or something, but for now, I wouldn't anticipate that there'd be any public parking there.
There hasn't really been anything going on for the last couple of weeks.
Right. It just wouldn't really, I think, be worth it to open that up, paint lines or not, but open up to the public and then have to close it down again in a few weeks, so. Chris, do you want to
Boland
add?
mobilized this week. The contractor mobilized this week. They brought their equipment on site. They plan on working very soon.
Thank you.
Shannon, did you have your hand
Nope.
up? Okay, all right, so that, I think, takes care of that topic. And moving on to our topic of interest here, which is the establishment of a process for evaluation of city-owned properties, and specifically relative to their potential sale and or development. And we're looking at the owning an armory, I guess, is our focus for this evening. So we can begin to have that conversation. What is it we want to see there? And yes, go ahead.
Isn't the Housing Commission looking at city-owned properties?
They are, they're working on it, they're kind of doing this exercise, so I think it's great to have the council's input at this point, because that's kind of where we left it up at the meeting, is asking, what their opinion is, the recommendations to the council, and then this is actually great to have this exercise now. I'd love to hear from you guys what your expectations are for selling the property. Because I believe we have 90+ properties that we potentially could be looking at. Doesn't mean we're selling them. The city staff has to go through and decide what needs to stay for infrastructure purposes or.
And knowing, obviously, as Steve kind of laid it out for us, that there are restrictions, really very specific restrictions in terms of how that building can be modified. The gym space is pretty much kind of the expectations that we have a gym space. And then we have long-term tenants to whom we've made a pretty significant commitment. I see Ian in the back there. So I guess the question for council is, so if we're looking at a building like this, and we're talking about its sale, go ahead, Scott.
So, just a thought, because it seems like we keep moving offices, running out of space here, running out of space there, we don't have a big enough spot for the council chambers when we have our big topics that come up and stuff like that. Why don't we look into maybe renovating that, moving our city offices there, moving the council up there, having a multi-use building for the city, maybe look at not having this as City Hall.
What would
Kind
you
of
do here, sell
consolidate down.
this?
Huh?
What would you do here,
Sell
sell
it.
this? Okay.
Which building would be more likely to be sold?
I think it'd probably be easier to sell this than it would be the armory. Because it'd be multi-use, we'd have the community, we'd have, if we're gonna invest the money into it to fix it, I'm saying if we're gonna invest the money into it to fix it, have a multi-use, that way the city still has, other departments that can come up and use it, and that's just one idea. The other idea was maybe look at, when Steve says multi-use, I was thinking, well, maybe that's a good opportunity where maybe we could do a multi-use community and some type of apartments or a private-public partnership.
I have two questions. Scott, do you know or does anybody know the square footage of the two buildings? Are they comparable, or one is much bigger?
Of this
than the other?
building and of the
Yeah.
armory?
I mean, so, I think you're kind of getting into where you're starting to compare like apples to oranges between those two buildings. This building is obviously laid out to be office space. That building's gonna have like, I mean, I guess you could hold the council and the gymnasium and.
The gymnasium, structurally, it has to stay, it doesn't have to be a gym, it has to be one big room.
It has to be a gym. It's required to be utilized as a gym.
Oh, okay.
Right.
All right.
Yeah.
That'd make it difficult.
Yes, you have like a big room that you kind of can't really, I mean, you could temporarily like put tables and chairs in there, but.
You could hold a meeting, but it has to be, it has to have a primary function as a gym.
Correct.
Cecilia?
Yes, so I was just curious, this is, to go back to my point about that I was making around evaluating what other cities do. What do other cities do with their armory buildings? This is a common problem, I think, for a lot of municipalities. And so what have they done? I know that in the case of, that I'm familiar with in Rochester, New York, which was mentioned, an armory was turned into high-end retail and restaurant space. And of course, very different dynamic than Oneonta, but still, the question was answered with private development. So I'm curious, if that could be a potential pathway for us.
I think Walton did that with their armory.
I'm sorry?
Walton.
Yeah, I mean, most municipalities have sold these armory buildings.
So that's an
Sold
important data
theirs,
point.
Loversville sold theirs,
Yeah.
So from the perspective of a developer looking at that building, one of the things that Judy outlined was that there are a few paths forward for funding off of historic tax credits and off of other means. And so the potential of, the connection to a private developer in some fashion may be something that we want to consider, in which case, what does that look like? What do we not want? Is there anything we don't want? Given that we have, we know where the armory is, we know what the neighborhood looks like, we know how much parking there is there, et cetera. So are there things that we would not want there?
Well, it seems to me it's limited because there's no parking, or very limited parking. Ice skating rink?
So you've been liaison to the Housing Commission for a bit, they've been talking about this. Can you kind of give us some of the detail of their thinking?
Well, my notes say get info out to the developers, select one parcel to present to council before the next housing commission. They're supposed to start an email chain and really kind of flesh this idea out. We have not had any discussions about the armory. That's probably what the largest asset this physical structure asset that the city owns.
Arguably,
That's, it presents an opportunity for housing, if a developer wanted to move in for housing for folks that use the public transportation system.
Right.
And so, it might be a good opportunity for someone that's interested in housing for those folks that need housing and don't necessarily need the parking spaces. So.
Yes.
Just to follow up on Lynn's point and also the point that I was making about looking to a private developer, are there, and perhaps this is a question for city staff, are there developers that specialize in transforming armories into something other than what they were intended for in their development?
I think a historic preservation architects that we work with has worked with a number of developers who do those types of buildings and maybe specialize in those, maybe not necessarily armories, but historic buildings. I don't know, Stephen or Judy, if you know anyone.
Yeah, I mean, the people that prepared this report for us, that's literally what they do, is do reuse, rehabilitation. That's
Historic.
Yeah.
I was just curious, armories in particular, just because it is a problem, I know, for many cities.
Yeah, I mean, so like, I think many historic reuse projects are like an armory. They're built to be something that they are no longer needed for. So like, yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of the meat and potatoes of that particular firm's projects, is taking buildings like the armory and making them into something that's not an armory.
I'd like to piggyback on, I think it was Cecilia's point about looking for precedents, looking for what other cities have done with their armories. A lot of them, as you mentioned, they share a lot of the same characteristics, if not the same restrictions that we have, for instance, with how it's used. Yes, Jenny?
I want to interrupt.
You're fine.
Just financially, I'll just put my 2 cents in.
That's fine.
I would strongly suggest that the council explore ideas of selling the building and having a developer take control of it to renovate it financially, because if we are able to get the armory off of our asset list, it will save the taxpayer a lot of money. The estimated repair for the roof right now, I want to say, is over 1.5 million. And so if just heating the building and and taking care of the water damage and the different things that is going on with the building financially, I think the best course to explore, in my financial opinion, is to sell.
And that might dovetail still with the idea of, let's see what precedents have played out in other places, because we're likely to have seen public-private. Go ahead, Scott.
No,
Go ahead.
Steve, I'm not familiar, I grew up, I remember when they took on the armory. Is there any restrictions to us selling it other than the restrictions that they have about the gym, but is there any restrictions on our part because we took it for $1 and?
Yeah, no, we just have the use restriction, but even that, we could theoretically, Dave.
There was an attempt, there was discussion to sell it maybe, I don't remember how many years ago. It wasn't 7 or 8. Pardon me?
I did know.
7 or 8 years ago. And what we did is that we contacted New York State Office of General Services, and they said that we could make an application for a local bill from our legislature to have them pass an exemption that we could remove that restriction from it. So it would have to be a legislative act, but we can do that by making a request and going through our elected officials to see if we can get that through the legislature, and if it is, then that can be removed. But that would have, something we would have to request be removed, and generally in order to do that, we would have to have some sort of a plan in place as to what our intention was after removing that restriction, that's currently in our deed restriction.
And so I guess I'd like to ask council, would you be willing to give up also the armory garage? Or do you want to retain that? The police and the fire department have used the armory garage for a long time, and they have a lot of different assets that are in there, so that would present some challenges. Nothing that can't be overcome, but we just have to build space somewhere else.
That's interesting.
Is that the building across the street?
Yeah. And there's not much land either side of that. NYSEG, right, Greg? They've got the right of way and. And then we're now utilizing parking further east of that.
Yes.
So.
That's an interesting observation about the garage.
I think initially, I would agree with Ginny, is that probably the best thing to do is get it off the books. It sounds like from Steve's presentation that there's a lot of opportunity for private developers to come in and utilize that opportunity.
Yes. We're just, obviously we face the problem of some of the biggest incentives to restoring, reutilizing, rehabilitating historic structures are the tax credit structure that we are not going to really benefit from.
Right, and when we hire a contractor, we're gonna be paying prevailing rate.
Right.
So the number that we saw tonight, that was a great point on Scott's part. That means they're probably 2 to 3 times higher.
Sure.
All right, so I think we've got, it sounds like we are all kind of in agreement about where we'd like this to go. I think I would like to kind of come back to the idea of determining those precedents that already exist out there with other armories, and I wonder how we might be able to get to that information so that we can share that in the council. Any thoughts?
Well, luckily we know where all those armories are located because I gave a presentation that listed them.
Yeah. So what's our best way? What is our best way of determining how those have been used, and
just look all of them up.
I mean,
Yeah,
could we ask
like-
the housing commission to investigate selling this property, and what we might do with it? Well, I mean, we have a group of people who volunteered to try to do this exact thing, so rather than having someone who has other stuff to be doing, do it. That seems to make sense to me,
Good idea.
or finance.
I see Judy in the back. Have staff already put a substantial amount of time and you know a path that you want to move forward with?
I don't, a path for making a decision, I think that that's gonna be council. I think that we can do some research on, the armories or.
Yeah, I mean, we know what other people have done. We have a survey that shows what the community kind of voted on, what they wanted to see at that location,
It looks like recreation, right? Wasn't it like 49% or something?
Yeah, I mean, most of the top 4 uses were recreational, community services, like, I mean, those were.
That was number one.
But that doesn't mean we can afford that. So I think that's the biggest problem we have. We can't afford those people.
Well, no, not us doing this.
But
I'm not
looking,
saying we do that.
sure, but looking at that is, we shoot for the stars and settle for the moon, but we know what we're shooting for, right? So we want that space to be connected to the neighborhood in a way that the neighborhood would like it to be. Go ahead,
I
Scott.
kind of think Katie's on the same point as Cecilia, is on the same point as the rest of us, trying to look at our assets and stuff, and seeing what's historically already been done. I think the housing, kind of like we've asked them to do it before, and they've really taken it on. I think that's a good spot for it.
Yeah, I mean,
You
they're
know,
literally
then-
willing to do the work.
I mean, if they have to reach out to city staff, okay, but I mean,
Yeah, I can send a request to the chair of the housing commission, and then Len, having been here, can kind of more clarify for them why we're requesting that. Does that make sense?
Sure, but they would want to know what the council's perspective are. So what are you looking to do? Do you want, you mentioned retail and something else up in
Well,
Rochester?
that was the example,
Right.
and it's not just retail, it's sort of higher end and higher end restaurants, so it's a very specific kind of project.
Sure. And
Um,
then you have Walton, which is probably
It's also a
lower
restaurant,
retail.
right?
Also,
I've never done that.
Yeah, there's a restaurant in there.
Walton has like a restaurant, bar.
yeah.
And then we also have what the community has kind of determined that they like about it. Go ahead, Kenny.
Right, which is, in my mind, would be like a community center, right, where there's more multifunction space, there's the big gym that you can rent and use. I think we would need, whoever does it, whether it's us or someone else, would need like a coordinator for that, somebody who's on site. It would be a perfect continuing home for the Oneonta Teen Center. It would be sort of a teen-centric space, but then the rest of the space would be really opened up for the same purpose, which is community connection, which is what we saw from the survey. So that would be, that or housing would be the only things that I would be willing to sell that building for, personally.
Right, but you gotta remember as a developer, what are they gonna do
How are they
in
gonna
that
make money?
space to make money?
They're not. It would have to be a community organization who wanted to take it on for some purpose.
I didn't really
Unless
have
it's
any.
You look like you're about to pull the trigger, all
I
right?
have a question for Steve,
Yes, go
actually. Just a review of your slide. The slide that listed all the armories, was the connection between these based on size of the city or the architect who designed those armories?
The architect who designed it.
Right, okay. So,
like Walton isn't on the list.
right,
But Walton is a privately owned armory now that has like a dance hall bar, whatever. Gloversville was turned into like a B&B. Amsterdam had another, like they did like a hotel thing in it, but again, those are all privately owned, privately operated, privately maintained.
yeah.
And I think it should be noted that when the community did a survey, retail was like way down at the bottom. A lot of the like mixed use buildings kind of way down at the bottom. Like none of those kind of hotel, restaurants, cafes, all the way down at the bottom. So a lot of those uses did not really rank up as far as community approval.
Thank you for noting that.
Community interest.
Do you think you've got enough?
Yeah, I'm taking some notes here. I mentioned the survey, but you're gonna be at our meeting anyway, so.
Yeah.
And I'll just shoot just a quick email to the chair.
Include me in
Yeah,
that.
of course.
Len, would it be helpful to forward them the document that we were given as well? The whole thing, or do you think that's too much info? Maybe just the survey?
50 pages.
Yeah.
I know, the slideshow is not quite as long.
Yeah.
Yeah, 'cause I think we had 67 pages of it.
I just kept reading.
204 pages long.
204?
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing.
But the slideshow itself.
Yeah, so maybe curating some of that information? I don't know, some of them are
Maybe
nerds
just
and
have
would be willing to read
speakers
it.
presentation.
Yeah, I was gonna say
That's
that presentation was very helpful, summarizing.
Can I ask a question? What is the ask of the Housing Commission? What are we expecting back from the Housing Commission once they've reviewed this?
I wrote down to take a look at the survey and see if a developer would be interested.
Are they going to be reaching out to developers?
I can provide that list of developers that was part of that exercise back in '21. And they can start going through and reaching out to those different folks.
It seems that is part of the function of our planning and development team, and I just want to figure out what the role is for
That's why I
city
asked
staff and the
Judy
process.
that
I
about.
wasn't sure what you were asking here.
I just don't want to step on anybody's toes, and that's why I was asking
I
if
just
that's the
think
path
that-
you want.
The planning and development department gets mixed messages from council. One of the reasons we brought this up because with the armory is we want to invest our time in the armory. We have a study done, we have some breaking schedules, so we want to be looking at the armory. And we need direction from the council. I don't think we need direction from the housing commission, we need direction from the council so we can do our jobs. And that's researching what can be done in the armory, what development might be possible. And so I would prefer that that's a staff function.
Is there value, Judy, in,
Question, sorry, Lynn.
sorry, Judy, is there value in a recommendation from the Housing Commission?
To
If there's
council,
what?
Is there value in a recommendation from the Housing Commission? Because I think that's what we're.
to council, to give direction.
That's why I just want Judy's perspective. I
Well, I think.
didn't want to step on anybody's toes
I
here.
just,
and-
like, going back to the housing commission is working on the vacant property list. We already have a map that shows the developable lots, they should start with that. Because that's already knocked out a ton of the vacant lots that we have. Which, you know, what's left on that is not very many, I don't know the exact amount, but not very many. So that's more valuable to have them actually looking at, you know, the lots that we've already worked on over the past couple of years to come up with that information. And then with the armory, I think we just need, what I would need, and Stephen and Greg, we need to know, you know, what you don't wanna see in the armory, so that we can take a look at what's left and what you do want to see in the armory. Before we do invest a lot of time and effort into pursuing development for that.
So I think the question was whether or not, I forget if it was Cecilia or Katie, whether or not this is something that the council supplies, or do we have the Housing Commission take a look at this, make a proposal that comes then to council a little bit more fully formed, and then we weigh in on, or you weigh in on that? Is that basically, I don't recall if it was you, Cecilia?
I think that was, please.
I was just gonna put forward that perhaps we actually talk about selling the building, rather than talking about developers, really just talking about whether or not we're gonna sell it. Maybe that should be
Yeah,
the term.
I'm there too.
Yeah.
I'd rather look forward. and-
Yeah.
So for me, I'd rather just sell the asset and be done with it, because since that, we bought it for $1, I mean, just rough numbers off the top of my head, I remember we spent a lot of money on the front facade, we've spent a lot of money on the roof. The heating is just astronomical. I think we redid the heating plant at some point, or we refurbished it. I don't know.
We've done work.
I've lost track of how much money we put into the building. And so we, as a city, we cannot afford this asset.
So it sounds like that we're not going to task the Housing Commission with anything more than they're already doing here. We have, I hate to use the word consensus, but it sounds like there's a number of people here on council who are saying, try to sell the thing.
Right, so, Dave, So we need, if we sit there and say we're gonna sell this, do we have to go start the thing with our legislator at the same time, or do we have to just, like, is the plan saying we're gonna sell this, and then we go to the legislator, or we have to have a plan of, we actually have somebody that we're gonna sell it to, and then we go to the
You
legislature?
should understand that the legislative, for example, the legislative year is now done.
Right.
That the legislature is going out of session right now to finish their year. The very earliest that if we made the application right now, the very earliest would be for a year from now, if we were lucky. So if we're gonna go down that path, what somebody should do is tell me that that's what you want us to do, and we'll contact our legislators, and we'll put together a proposal, and we'll ask them to put a special vote in to get it, see if they can get it passed to remove that requirement. But again, that takes at least a year, and it needs to be done sooner rather than later. I mean, although, again, whether we do it now or do it in the fall, right now there's a gap, so it wouldn't be any quicker. Except to get it in the hopper and get the people, get our folks to do it. I'm sure our local legislators would be happy to sponsor those things, both on the assembly and on the senate level, but we need to ask for it.
Sure. Katie?
I am not sure that we should go that route, because the survey of our local community said that they wanted the primary function to remain recreation. So if we remove the gym.
If we what?
If we remove the
You
gym.
can't remove the gym.
No, that's what he was just talking about.
That's
when he
the
was
rationale
talking.
for the legislature.
So I just, let me pause here. So one course of action would be finding a developer who would agree to the existing deed restriction.
Right.
Provide public recreation facility or availability in the gymnasium. When I say you can't remove the gymnasium, anyone who attempted to rehabilitate that facility that utilizes any sort of historic tax credits, SHPO would not allow them to remove the physical location of the gymnasium. Now, whether they closed that off and said it was privately used for their facility, that would be up to them if we removed that deed restriction. But they wouldn't be able to just wholesale change that space because SHPO would not permit permanent changes to that space. So one option would be trying to find a developer who wanted to maintain that access to that gymnasium. That would be an option.
So, would that answer your question or your concern?
That
Is that we
does.
find a developer that would work with us, that's that public-private partnership?
I think we can cast some seeds out there and see what comes back. Go
Can I
ahead.
just ask one question, maybe a suggestion? The list that was sent out to the community, the survey of the different uses, would that make sense for the council to look at that, see what those responses are, and take your own input and decide what on that list would you be willing to see or most interested to see, or you do not want to see that at all? I think if we focus maybe first on what end use is the city interested in, then we can start to develop, well, how might that happen? Maybe it is a sale, maybe it's not a sale, maybe there's some kind of a public-private partnership. If recreation is going to continue to be a component, and that's definitely something we want in there, that really narrows things down a lot as to what is going to be done with the space, so I think that can help us
So,
narrow our search. Katie?
so just to be clear, that's what I was suggesting we ask the housing commission to do, and then make a recommendation based on the community, based on the needs of the area, based on, their input from their respective fields. And, that's not to say that we don't do that also, but that at least provides us with like a jumping point. So exactly what you were saying is what I was suggesting. Thank you for putting it so eloquently.
Don?
Thank you for allowing me to go first.
I'd just like to say that if we do sell a building, we have to find an appropriate place for the youth center.
Right.
If that's an important part of the things we provide.
Huge, yeah.
Yeah, and or the youth center is part of the negotiation.
That's another possibility.
Right, Scott.
Should have got anything up here, don't feel happy. When we were talking to Christine from RSS, she wanted to do more with the community. Why don't you just reach out to them and see if that might be something they're interested with a private partnership? They'd probably keep the gym open because they said they wanted to be more into the community, be able to invite the community in and stuff. I mean,
There may be some folks, I think, that we might kind of put this in front of. I don't know that we have, I should not in my tenure, so it might have some value in just letting people know that we're interested in having conversations if they're interested.
I mean, I don't think you're gonna find a developer that if we leave a restriction on, is gonna actually wanna come in and buy this thing, and I don't think we can keep it forwarded the way it is. And eventually Steve will be up in front of us again saying that we're gonna condemn the place, cause it is gonna be falling, cause we haven't put money into it for 20 years.
Yeah.
And all these leaks have made it structurally unsound in 20 years.
Right, that's why I would recommend you sell it.
Yeah, so I think we're better off at this point. We know it's gonna be a year, let's start the process of getting that restriction off with the state, let's start really looking into this. I understand we gotta try to do something for youth and stuff like that, we've talked about this several times. I don't know, strategic plan, we gotta start, I think talking about youth needs to be in the strategic plan somewhere, what we can do for them. But I don't know, budget's gonna be real tight this year. I think everybody's gonna be surprised when the numbers come in front of us.
Yes.
So to kind of jump off that conversation you were having about how people that you think you might wanna put this in front of, has anyone expressed interest in the armory?
Yeah, there's been some interest expressed, but it's
Okay.
not appropriate for us to really have much of a conversation outside of this council starting to weigh in on what they want from the armory.
Gotcha. Well, I think it would be helpful to know who, even if that could only be shared in executive session, just so that we have an understanding of what proposed uses there might be, like what some possibilities might be, again.
I think they're so nebulous right now, I'm not certain that, the conversations have been.
So are they a secret
No, it's not. a
from
secret.
council?
No.
Okay, I'm just wondering.
No, they've just been,
Okay.
just conversations have been vague, generally speaking vague,
Okay,
but not a secret, no.
okay. I mean, if this person is a retail developer, right, to go back to that, that would help us to know that someone who's interested in retail wants to do this and, whether or not we might want to sell it to them someday in the future. That's not to say that we wouldn't consider other things, but it's interesting that we're not all on the same page.
So we have talked with, it's very, very nebulous, so but we have talked with people who are, who take care of veterans,
That's cool.
So that's one conversation we're having.
Okay.
We haven't talked with our residents.
I wasn't saying necessarily that, I'm saying like ours, something that's a community, and I remember Christine saying.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea, actually.
Does RSS do projects where they repurpose buildings, or are they mainly the
I don't think
construction?
so, that's not really their history.
Right.
Right, I was just saying something like that, like,
Yes, yes.
community oriented like that.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting idea.
Yeah.
Part of the issue with that building is it would be difficult to convert that structure to have enough units to make it financially feasible for a developer to say, you're not gonna have like a Chip Lugo who's like, yeah, I have this giant building and I can fit 4 very awkward apartments into it.
Right.
And I have a giant gymnasium. Like
Yes.
that's, so like.
My dream building.
Yeah, and like, you're limited with that particular building with residential development, because they really need, the reason that you have a loss on deeds, you have an RSS project, they want 60 units. They need to build enough units to make the project viable, and that particular building would be very difficult to put that many residential units into, which is kind of outlined in the big, the 204-page version of that. That's one of the challenges, is the residential aspect, like getting that volume of units in.
Interesting.
Not the same, as I said before, like the uses that came out in the surveys, the top, wish list of the community doesn't necessarily match up with how you can afford that building. So that's something like, I think we need to know, the planning and development department needs to know, as we reach out to developers for this building, they're coming in with an idea that's not one of those top 4. How willing is council gonna be to really listen to them when they're saying, this is what we can do with the building, and this is how we can afford to have this building, are we gonna just keep kicking it out because it's not the time for it? Because I can tell you right now that there's not a lot of space in that building for development, like Scott, your idea for City Hall over there, there's not a lot of room in there for office.
But I like that energy. Keep it.
I agree, I think it's, if it were a supplemental building for City Hall and for city space, it would be fine, but to replace it, this building over there, we're not gonna fit over there. But I'm hoping that council will be open to whatever the developers that we can find want to do with it, as long as, what they wanna do is reasonable and a good community value. Even if it's not what popped up high on our survey.
Scott?
So, not all my ideas are good, we all know that.
Well, I don't think it's bad, it's just, it would be great if we had that extra space,
Right.
but then the city's gotta dump so much
I think
money
that's
in.
$30 million. Well, I'm thinking, Mark, if they want an answer tonight, I'm just gonna say my opinion so we can try to. So my opinion is, I'd rather sit there and say, let's take the restrictions off, start the process, let's sell it, and then they can find whatever developers they can with the way we find that they can, knowing that we're trying to get the restriction off. That's my opinion.
And I would add to that, Scott, regardless of whether the restriction comes off, if there's a developer or some partnership that still wants to utilize the building as recreation, then that sounds like it.
Yeah, I'll take it too. Yes, but I'm just saying, it doesn't hurt to start, it's gonna be a year if, you don't have anybody coming forward.
Could I ask a question, David? So to start that, do we need a set plan? No, I missed that, all right.
Okay, I think,
Can I ask a quick question?
yes.
Well, no, we can close this topic, it's an additional business thing, maybe, sorry. It's from this topic, but it's a different thing, so we'll move on.
You done, okay. Anybody else? Okay, okay, that wraps that up. We have additional business and council consideration.
Just for clarity for the public, we have consensus out of this council and the mayor to move forward with our city attorney to the state legislature, both assembly and senate, to retract bills to see if we can get it through. There is no guarantee that we're going to get those bills passed.
What I would have to do is.
I could be David's age by the time they actually pass.
And also, there's, as Steve pointed out, the issue with
Anything's
SHPO
possible.
is not something to dismiss either. The fact that SHPO is going to be looking at that.
I would have to prepare a resolution for the council to approve, because we have to do a certified resolution, so if you're directing me to do that, I'll prepare that. We'll bring that in front of whomever it needs to go.
I think you've got the council.
Because the counter to this is that there's a majority of this council that wants to retain the asset and dump 30+ million into it.
I don't think we have the majority on this council wants to do that.
I'm just saying, there's the other side of that.
Yes, okay. It was like, somebody's told me to count numbers here. I didn't see them.
Require us to sell it.
No, we're just asking to move forward the exemption.
We're relieved of that, we would still have the
Right,
option.
we're just, creating ourselves more options.
We would remove that as a limitation.
Creating more options as we move forward. All right, so that ends the discussion of that topic. Additional business, things for council consideration, anyone? Anything going on this Saturday that anybody wants to talk about?
So, yes. So Saturday, DeAndre Spaghetti Daniels has created a family-friendly Juneteenth event that will be taking place in Neo Park on Saturday from 12 to 5, I believe. There will be all sorts of events down there. And I and my wonderful daughter will be speaking about Black Girls in Tech down there this weekend. But, so that will be one event that is taking place this Saturday for Juneteenth. And then, Mark, would you like to talk about the Downtown Renaissance, like the programming on
No, I think.
Wednesday?
Yeah, we're good. It's oh, that's right, Wednesday, I'm sorry, yes.
Wednesday.
Yeah, they kind of, this has taken on a life of its own, and people, Reverend Donna Clark is kind of spearheading a 2-hour presentation with music and speakers and so forth, from, I think it's 4:30 until 6:30, I think that's correct, in Muller Plaza, and that should be great. And
Is that also Juneteenth?
that's
So
on
that's
Wednesday, that's
Wednesday,
actually
the
on
19th,
Juneteenth. on
Tomorrow,
19th.
Tomorrow.
Yes.
Okay, and
And
then
then-
Saturday is the,
Is the Neo Park.
okay.
And that's, what's the hours again, Shannon?
Huh?
In Saturday in the park, it's from 1 to 4?
12 to 5.
I just want to say, in Muller Plaza, as I was driving through today, I saw they had the water
It
things
was busy,
set up for
yeah.
the kids, and I think that was great. I know that a lot of places opened up for the heat and everything, so, yeah.
Yeah, things are going well.
I wanna make like a general comment. So, based on some news articles that had been published recently about our attendance to things, I just want to make a general statement about how, well, you know, we love our positions, we're here because we are passionate and we, you know, love our jobs. But as with anybody in any position, there are gonna be times where we just might not be able to be present. Life didn't stop for us once we were elected and we received these positions. Many of us have, you know, aging family members or very young children, or just, but there's a myriad of things that, you know, we also have life to attend to as well. And so we are going to be absent to stuff. I am going to be absent to stuff, and I hope that it's going to be okay with everyone, that we are not able to make it to every single shoot off to, you know, different sessions. I mean, legislative committee, we've been adding more and more sessions to make sure we're getting to certain things. You know, some of us, I know especially me, I work several jobs, and I have a child, and I have many other things that I'm, you know, and so as much as I make it first priority to be here, even if it means that I am not home when I should be, right? I'm making that commitment to be here. It can't, it's just not possible for every time. So, I just want to throw that out there. So, that's it, that's my general.
Thank you, Shannon. Does anybody else have anything for the good of the council?
I have a couple things.
Yes.
So at our last meeting, we were scheduled to discuss the LDC and the ARPA funding, but they didn't get pushed forward to this agenda, so I would like to discuss them, please.
So the LDC, so as we left it,
I'm assuming we were prepared to have that discussion last time, so hopefully it's not a huge inconvenience.
was it our intention to move the LDC to the finance committee? Is that
Good.
where we were going with that, or?
What is that?
Basically, so the LDC is a tool, as we all know, right? So I found this unfinished, you know, 2/3 of the way completed LDC in my desk drawer when I came in. And it's a tool that we can use any number of different ways. But we just, in order to determine what the tool looks like, it's kind of, we have to determine what it is that we want to use it for.
So when you say we,
The city. Because it would be the city creating a local development corporation.
right, we're gonna include citizens within
Yes,
the board.
well, that's correct.
But it's we.
But what is it that we want this to do? What is the purpose of the tool?
To create economic development through the use of assets that are there.
Right. So, again, I was thinking that this was gonna land most probably appropriately with finance, once finance had gotten its feet under its, you know, we've been years already without this, and I think it makes a lot of sense to have a formulated plan and proposal brought to the council, so the council can then discuss that.
I would like to
That's
see
my
what you
sense.
have to date, because I know that a while ago we funded research for it, and I don't know what the outcome of that is. So that's why I've been asking for this for quite some time.
So I can read what I shared just to refresh everyone in the previous council's agenda memo. If that's what you'd like me to do.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, Greg, I'm just looking for the outcome from the folks that researched this for us. I've been
It's not
asking.
a finished product. We have some draft documents that basically have not been fully reviewed, and it's kind of been on hold. And the reason for that is competing priorities coupled with the lack of understanding of what it is we're trying to accomplish. Economic development, utilizing assets, as you were saying, I think, I don't know exactly what that means or what we're trying to accomplish. We don't have assets other than city-owned properties now.
Sure.
And, there's different ways from talking with the attorneys that have experience with this and are consulting with us. Their first question for us was, what is it you're trying to accomplish? And we didn't really have a clear answer, so they've developed some draft, bylaws and that kind of thing to help us figure out how this might come together, but I still think there needs to be a discussion, and maybe that is finance committee, maybe it's the council as a whole, discussing what it is we're trying to accomplish with it. So I think us being city staff who had been looking at this before, the mayor was involved as well, getting back into what was provided to us, reviewing that, getting back in touch, reconnected with our consultant. There will be additional expenditure, to have them continue on with us, I'm sure, but perhaps them having them come and give a presentation to get a greater understanding amongst the group. What could we do with it? What do we want to do with it? And then we can kind of pick a direction from there.
What is your reservation in sharing the draft documents with?
I can share the draft documents, but they're draft documents. They're not really public, they're draft. And we haven't even reviewed them yet or had discussions with the consultant. It kind of was just on hold from last summer, so.
Okay.
Yeah. Could someone share the total investment in the attorneys? I think it was $15,000 initially, and then there was a budget transfer of like $6,000. Am I remembering that correctly?
$20,563.
Okay. So if this is, I wish that we had talked about why we wanted an LDC prior to committing that amount of money. I made it known at that time. I'm like physically in pain about this right now, but we haven't, and here we are. So the Mohawk Valley Economic Development Council would like to advise us on an LDC for free. And so if it does go to the Finance Committee, in the spirit of what do other people do with their LDCs, the Mohawk Valley Economic Development Council would love to tell us about it. And I have a connection there. I want to say his name is Julian, and I'm happy to get you guys in contact so that we can have a plan for this $20,000 fund run.
And that is the key, knowing what we want to use it for.
Thank you.
ARPA was the other question you had.
Yep. Oh, let me catch my breath before we go here.
Yeah, and so I gotta tell you, this is on me. Greg and I both banging through the agenda, and after the agenda got done, it was like, oh wait, there were 3 things that we're moving over, and I spaced on it, and it didn't hit the agenda. As it is, I think the ARPA discussion warrants, a good, robust discussion as we just had.
Okay.
And so, it wasn't moved or taken off for any reason other than the fact that, oops, there it was and I forgot to move it, so it's, on me. But we can have that discussion, and I look forward to actually having that discussion. There's a lot of people who probably would like to know what our plans are. There's a lot of, we're kind of sure, I think, about some things, but not really, fully nailed down. So I think if we could have that discussion potentially at our next council meeting, if the agenda doesn't get too crazy.
Could we be provided with a list of things that we have specifically made motions to approve on that?
Sure we can.
And what is just we've talked about this?
Yeah, I'm sure.
Thank you. I would appreciate that distinction.
Don, did you have something?
Well, I have a question. The committee that looks into historical districts, what's it called?
Yeah.
Landmarks and historic preservation.
Yeah. The question I have is, can property owners opt out if they don't want to be part of the district? Because there are a number of people who spoke and didn't like it.
That's a question for Steve.
No.
They can't?
No.
Well, they cannot.
It's just like zoning. You can't opt out of the zoning district because you don't like it.
So the historical designation is zoning?
No, it's not a zoning thing, but I'm using a comparable, like, you can't opt out of the zoning district because you don't agree with the zoning. This is a very similar process.
Okay.
Like, you can't opt to be in a higher zoning district because you would rather use your property in a way that zoning doesn't allow.
But you said it's not a zoning.
I'm using a comparison you might understand. Like, similar to zoning, the Historic Preservation Board does not allow you to opt out of a district, just like you can't opt out of a zoning district.
Even if you don't want to be part of it.
Just like if you don't want to be part of a zoning district, you can't opt out of the zoning district.
Can I live in the city so I don't have to pay taxes?
So for example, like if I wanted to open a butcher shop at my house, I couldn't, because I'm not in that zoning district.
No, I understand, your understanding of zoning, but this seems to me to be somewhat different. But you said no, you answered the question, no.
Right.
All right, so at 10 minutes to.
But I think that
Katie just stepped up.
she has several things that she would like to bring up.
There are 3 items she would like to discuss when she returns.
Okay. Did somebody else have something?
I would like to go into executive session.
Go into, for the purpose of?
Talk specifically about an employee.
All right.
I just didn't know if we were waiting for Katie to come back.
We are.
If we're gonna do that, can I run out and come back?
Very, very quickly, please. Yeah.
No, meaning like, not like we.
To the restroom, you're saying?
Yes.
Yes.
No, if we're going into executive session.
We are. We just had and I'm just gonna call the vote.
So then I think.
Bring you up to
have a
speed
motion or
on-
a second.
Discussing a motion to
No, we
go
don't
into
actually-
executive session to talk about a specific employee.
Okay.
And Scott seconded.
So I'm gonna run out.
Yeah, sure.
And all in favor?
Wait, is it?
We're gonna go.
Yes.
Yes, there's a motion.
But I need a vote.
It has to be voted on.
All right, please.
Councilmember Moser Campbell.
Aye.
Councilmember Walsh Russo.
Aye.
Councilmember McHugh.
Aye.
Councilmember LaCroix Shu.
Aye.
Councilmember Carson.
Yes.
Councilmember Harrington.
Yes.
Councilmember Matheson.
Yes.
Thank you.